Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another Soothkeep live stream. Tonight's going to be a very exciting topic as we delve into the calendar. The fact that the calendar is broken and there is no human calendar that works right. Everything is trying to use a broken calendar system in a broken solar system. It's going to be an exciting time. So if you have good audio and good video, please give me a thumbs up. And then in a moment or so, we'll get right into this video. I apologize that tonight, for some reason right now, we don't have live stream going to Substack or Facebook. I got a message prior to going live that they weren't working right, and I wasn't sure if they were going to load or not. And they failed when I went live. So as of right now, they're not on two of our normal channels. We apologize for that. All right, we got a ton of thumbs up here. And I went through my slides. I think everything is going to work great today. And let's just go forth with this. This is going to be an amazing subject. But before we go forth, let me just give you all just a couple minutes of update on what's happened recently. We just got back from, of course, going out to Colorado Springs for the conference out there, the Rapture in the Rockies. It was an amazing time. Lots of great messages, lots of great speakers. And this calendar message was very well received there. Then from there, we visited with our grandkids for a few days. Nita stayed with them. I flew out to Whittier, California, to Morning Star Christian Chapel. Had a wonderful time with the believers there. We had a wonderful Thursday night meeting. Then I got together with Mark Henry Friday morning. We went for a hike. Then Friday afternoon, I drove back up to John Wayne Airport and flew back to Colorado Springs. Got there late Friday evening. Saturday morning, we got up, had breakfast, and then we took off and got up about 3-4 hours on the way home. We went south to Albuquerque, met friends in Albuquerque. Then we went to Belen, New Mexico, where I spoke on Sunday. Then Sunday afternoon, we drove a few hours towards home, spent the night, and then we got home yesterday. So it's been a wonderful time. Great. I spoke 4 times, 4 different messages, had a wonderful time with the believers. And now we're going to do the calendar message that I spoke at the Prophecy Watchers Conference in Colorado Springs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave myself up as in a little frame on the side of the screen, and then I'll put the slides up. Hopefully this will be big enough for the presentation. So let's just go ahead and move into the presentation. And here's the first slide. When the gods broke the calendar. Now, the 2 gods here, there's a male god, there's a female god. We'll walk into this a little bit deeper later on, but right now, I'll just give you a hint. This is Mars and Venus. In the Babylon, or in the Canaanite, it was Baal and Ashtaroth. In different mythologies, they were different names. For those of you who are not that familiar with my ministry, or maybe you've forgotten because you've only seen me once or twice, this ministry is called Soothkeep. That means Truth Fortress. And I am a researcher and prophecy teacher from Drumright, Oklahoma. I have a lot of venues you can connect with me on. And we have now added Substack. It's not yet on this slide. So when the gods broke the calendar. Fascinating subject. But when we look at this controversy, we're really talking about a calendar controversy, not merely that the calendar is broken, but which calendar should we be using? Who's going to come out if the calendars go head to head in a fight? So let's just start with the question, which calendar is original? Is the Essene calendar the original calendar? Is the Jewish calendar the original calendar? Is the Gregorian calendar the original calendar? Which one is the original? And the next question is, which calendar is most accurate? Is the Essene calendar the most accurate? Is the Jewish calendar the most accurate? is the Gregorian calendar the most accurate? Which is the best quality? Which one should we be using on that regard? And then there's yet another question. Which calendar is God's calendar? Is God using the Essene calendar? Is God using the Jewish calendar? Is God using the Gregorian calendar? Which of these is the authorized calendar? Just like we talk about which Bible is the authorized Bible, which calendar is the authorized calendar? To answer these questions, folks, we need to get the full context. We need to do a full survey of calendars in ancient history. Now, I can't give you all of the data. That would take hours and hours and hours, but I'll give you some of the data, give you enough to get a feel for the point that I'm trying to make. So we're going to look at a full survey, pieces of a full survey of the calendar in ancient history. And once you see the Godzilla in history, the Godzilla that broke the calendar, you won't be able to unsee it, and your paradigm on the calendars will be changed forever. Now, I apologize for this cute little Godzilla picture that I put in here, because on my PowerPoint slides, I can put the that picture in there, and the black background does not show. But when I use the PowerPoint slides in StreamYard, for some reason that black background shows up. It was a lot cooler in the original presentation. All right, so let's start with the unbroken original year and the unbroken original calendar. Now, if you haven't yet figured it out, there is a difference between the year and the calendar. We make calendars to represent the year that we're working with. And what's interesting about this is if you go back in history prior to about 701 BC, you discover men were using a 360-day calendar. Now, why were they using a 360-day calendar? Well, because they had a 360-day year. So the original calendar, the original year was 360 days long. The lunar year and the solar year were identical. The solar year didn't slide back and fall behind or go ahead. The lunar year didn't fall back or go ahead. They were exactly identical. There were exactly 12 months, and there was exactly 30 days in each month. So 12 times 30 is 360. From summer solstice to winter solstice was exactly 180 days. From a solstice to an equinox, or from an equinox to a solstice, was exactly 90 days. From winter solstice to winter solstice, or summer solstice to summer solstice, was exactly 360 days. And the feasts from one year to the next were always exactly 360 days apart. Not 1 day long or 2 days long, not 1 day short or 2 days short. Also here on the original calendar had a 360-day year. There weren't an extra 4 or 5 days added to the year, whether intercalated into the months or just added at the end of the year. It was 12 months of exactly 30 days. And this is around the world. We'll be looking at some of that evidence here in a few minutes. Now, with this original calendar and with that original year, there was perfect harmony with the calendar and the year. It was a calendar and a year that any grade school student could easily handle. You didn't have to do any fancy adjusting. There were no leap years. There were no leap days. There were no leap months. There were no leap weeks. The calendar was just 360 days. Anybody, any grade school student that has, I don't know, fifth, sixth grade could easily just count the days. 30 days in a month, 90 days from an equinox to a solstice, or a solstice to an equinox, 180 days from an equinox to an equinox, or a solstice to a solstice, and 360 days from winter solstice to winter solstice, summer solstice to summer solstice, spring equinox to spring equinox, fall equinox to fall equinox, from feast in one year to the feast in the next year. It was always simple counting. There were no adjustments, no leap years, no leap days, no intercalated weeks or months. There was no need to catch the lunar calendar back up to the solar calendar. Now, I'm going to show you some information here, and you're going to see that a 360-day year in ancient history is simply observational science. It is a little problematic because science is a general rule in our day, which is not true observational science. It's theoretical science. It's science that clings to the idol of evolution, bows to the idol of evolution. They have this mindset that there's been tiny incremental changes over tens of millions of years, hundreds of millions of years, billions of years. They cannot fathom that in recent recorded history, catastrophes happened in the heavens that affected Earth and destroyed the calendar, broke the calendar. But if you go back in ancient history and you let the ancients just tell you what they observed with their eyes, what they observed with their counting and measuring, they tell you that they had a 360-day year. They're not merely and only telling you that they had a 360-day calendar. They're telling you they had a 360-day year. This is revolutionary information. Let's start with the biblical testimony. Genesis 7:11. In the 6th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, all the fountains of the deep were broken open, and the windows of heaven were opened. So I want you to catch this. The 2nd month, the 17th day of the month. Keep this in mind, because in just a couple minutes here, we're going to do some 6th grade level math. Typically, that's all the math you need, folks, for the patterns in the Bible. So when you go to Genesis 7:24, and then on the other side of the ellipses, that's those 3 little dots, we're in Genesis 8:3-4. The waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. I want you to catch that. 150 days. The waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated, and the ark rested on the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. So catch that. 150 days. At the end of the 150 days, the water had receded. And now we started with the 2nd month on the 17th day of the month. Now we're in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month, and it says 150 days. This is 6th grade math. So if you measure from the 17th day of the 2nd month, which is Nisan, to the 17th day of the 7th month, Tishri, you got 150 days. Now I think I might have a mistake on this slide. So if someone thinks that 2nd month should have been, shouldn't be Nisan, send it to me. I kind of, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking that Nisan was the 1st month and Tishri is the 7th month. And somehow I have a typo on that slide. And I saw that typo when I was at the conference, but it was too late. But anyway, let me know. The same stretch on the Jewish calendar from the 17th day of the 2nd month to the 17th day of the 7th month is 147 to 148 days, depending upon whether or not you're in a leap year, where you have the extra month and you have extra days. And the same stretch on the Essene calendar is 152 days, at least the Essene calendar, the way it's typically presented, with a block of 90 days and then a single day, another block of 90 days and a single day, etc. That would give you 152 days. So what we're looking at here is that God is counting 30-day months. He's not counting months and days according to an Essene calendar. He's not counting days and months according to the Jewish calendar. He's counting days and months according to an original 360-day year, 12 months of exactly 30 days. Now, when we go to different parts of the world, there's a tremendous amount of evidence that the original calendar was 360-day years and 360 days, and the original year was 360 days. Now, I'm going to pull up these slides also on my desktop so that I can see the notes on some of them, because we're going to need some of these notes. There we go. I've got it up on my desktop. So the notes are not showing up. The notes that show up in my PowerPoint presentations are not showing up, and I don't even know how to make them show up in when I do the slide presentation here in StreamYard, but that's okay. I've got the notes in another location. So in a book that's called Astronomy, Astrologie and Mathematik, it's German. It's done by G. Thibaut, and he makes two quotes in this book. The first one is, all Veda texts speak uniformly and exclusively of a year of 360 days. Passages in which this length of year is directly stated are found in all the Brahmanas. He also says, the moon waxes for 15 days and wanes for 15 days. The sun moves north for 180 days and moves south for 180 days. Now, that's very fascinating information. G. Thibaut was one of the greatest Vedic scholars in the history of the world. He was as scholarly as any learned man in India on these, but he was a Western scholar. Now, the Vedas are the foundational sacred texts of Hinduism, that, you know, the religion of ancient India. The Brahmanas are commentaries on the Vedas. So what he's pushing here, he's not pushing fabricated evidence for a cool theory. All he's telling us is what he reads in the Veda texts and in the Brahmanas, which are commentaries on the Veda texts. This is simply an observational record. This is observational science of what the ancient Indians saw with their own eyeballs. Now, personally, he rejected the claims of these ancient Indian scholars. He thought that they were just a bunch of intellectual elites who were rounding a 365 and a quarter day year down to 360 days. He couldn't really understand why they would do it. It didn't make sense to him, but that's what he concluded. Why did he conclude that? Because he believes that we've had a 365 and a quarter day year for billions and billions of years, 10 to 12 or even 14 billion years, depending upon whose age of the universe theory you're believing. You know, I can remember when the age of the universe was 5 or 6 billion years. And then they went up to 12 billion years. And now a lot of them are saying 13.4 to 13.7 or 13.8 billion years. They're just going to keep expanding that out. You know, the bigger a number they throw out there, the bigger the gap they have between them and the Bible. But anyway, notice that these ancient Indians, this was not some subjective theory they were presenting. They were looking at the moon. The moon would wax for 15 days, get smaller for 15 days, or get bigger for 15 days, and then it would wane for 15 days. That's get smaller for 15 days. And then the sun moved north for 180 days and moved south for 180 days. This is scientific observation by ancient scientists. We also see a 360-day year in ancient Persia. So we read in, let me pull up the next slide here. I got to pull it up on my desktop. So this work here that we're quoting from is H.S. Nyberg in his book, The Text of the Mazdayanishan Calendar. So this isn't Mazda like a car. This is the ancient Persian god Mazda. And he's talking about the ancient Mazdayanishan calendar. And he says in Persia, the ancient year was 360 days with 12 months of 30 days. Only in the 7th century BC were 5 Gotha days added to the calendar. And this is what the whole world did. Once their calendar got all screwed up, everyone fixed the problem by adding 5 days to the year. They didn't throw those days in the middle of the calendar. They didn't put them in between quarters. They all added them to the end of the year. So you run your normal 360-day year they're used to having. Then they'd have 5 days at the end of the year. Eventually, they figured out they also had to add a leap day every 4 years. They didn't figure that out right away. And so their calendar was still slowly drifting backwards in the seasons. Now, again, here with these ancient Persians, the scholars here that are recording what the Persians believed, they're recording what they saw with their own eyes. This is ancient scientists and ancient scholars writing down what they saw, and then we have scholars writing down what they read in the ancient Persians. Again, none of these modern scholars believed the ancient scholars. They thought they were all crazy. So let's move on to the next slide. And here we're going to look at another record from ancient Persia. The Bundus was a sacred book of the ancient Persians. It records 180 days from winter solstice to summer solstice. Now, if you used a calendar that was similar to the Jewish calendar, and many ancient cultures have them, and they still have them. The Muslim calendar is the same kind of a lunar calendar as the Jewish calendar, and many other cultures had it. You would not have 180 days from winter solstice to summer solstice. You would have approximately 182 and a half days. That's just the way the modern calendar works. But back then they had 180 days. So nobody would count 180 days from winter solstice to summer solstice unless the year was actually 180 days. Their whole religion absolutely necessitated an accurate count. They had to have spring solstice, winter solstice and summer solstice had to be nailed. Fall equinox, spring equinox had to be nailed. So let's move on and look at the ancient Babylonian calendar. So in ancient Babylon, they also had a 360-day year. The ancient Babylonians observed a year of 360 days divided into 12 months of exactly 30 days. And this is why the Babylonians and Sumerians came up with the 360 days in a circle. Their whole year went in a big circle and came right back to where it started. There were 360 days in the year. This was, I think, God-given man a great blessing that actually helped him with math. This is what led the Babylonians and the Sumerians into a basic system that they used for some mathematical things. Now, the author where we find these thoughts is Dr. Jeremias in his book, Das Alter der Babylonischen Astronomie. Again, this is a German book. It's on page 35. And Dr. Jeremias is not twisting the record to force it into a cool theory. He is simply recording what the ancient Babylonians said in their ancient documents. Now, what's interesting, He's simply recording what they said. He didn't believe it. He didn't believe the ancient astronomy. He didn't believe they actually had a 360-day year. He thought they were crazy. He thought they were intellectual elites rounding off the actual year length from 365 and a quarter days to 360 days so that they could harmonize it with their mathematical theory of 360 days or 360 degrees in a circle. I think he's wrong. I don't think these ancients were rounding off the length of the year. I think they were actually in a terrible situation where they literally and actually went through a catastrophe that happened in the heavens. They went from a 360-day year, a literal actual 360-day year, to a 365-day year. And it created all kinds of problems for them. But we also see this 360-day year in ancient Sumeria. So the ancient Sumerians, by the 21st century BC, had developed a system founded on a calendar year of 360 days. And this fit neatly in with their mathematics and astronomic systems, which were based on 6 and 60, which equal 360 when multiplied. Now, this information here on Sumeria I found in a book by D.E. Duncan called Calendar. And here he traces the 360-day calendar all the way back to 2000 BC. It probably goes way earlier than that, but that's how far back he traced it in ancient Babylon, Sumeria. But again, here, he doesn't seem to believe the ancient history. He doesn't seem to believe the ancient scientists. He seems to believe that the length of the year was actually twisted or squeezed or massaged or whatever you want to call it to fit it to their mathematical theories. They were trying to squeeze a 365 and a quarter length year into a 360-day year. And they fudged their calendars to pretend they had a 360-day year. Now, no matter where we go in ancient history, you can go, I've given you a bunch of nations already. You can add the Incas, you can add the Mayans, you can add the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Arabs, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Greeks, the Romans, and many other independent cultures around the world recorded 360-day years. They weren't merely and only using a 360-day calendar for some reason that's hard to wrap their mind around. It's hard for us to wrap our minds around. They were actually looking at 30-day months. They were actually looking at and experiencing 90-day quarters. They had 180 days from solstice to solstice and from equinox to equinox. They had 360 days from winter equinox solstice to winter solstice. 360 days from a feast to a feast. It was a very simple year, a very simple calendar. Now, here's the problem that we're facing. This is not our experience today. Our experience today does not line up. We don't have a simple calendar. We have a 365 and a quarter day year. We don't have 30 days in a month. If you try and use the lunar month, you get 29 and a half days and a little change. And so the lunar months start falling behind. You get 12 lunar months and you're 11 and a quarter days behind, or 11 and a half days behind the solar year. And if we try and use synthetic months, which is what everyone does today, or almost everybody, you have a little bit over 30 days in a month on average. And so it just doesn't work. Our year is broken. Therefore, our calendar is broken and things don't line up. Today, the year is broken. So what we have then is the lunar year and the solar year are out of sync. The solar year is 365.25 days. The lunar year, which is 12-fold lunar cycles, is 354 days. The lunar month, or the lunar cycle, is 29.5 days. The lunar year is 11.25 days shorter than a solar year. And there are 12.3 lunar months in a solar year. So we have a problem. Today, the calendar is in chaos. So not only is our year in chaos, our calendar is in chaos. If you try and follow the lunar calendar, which is what the Jews are doing, that's what the Muslims do, your year slips 11.25 days per year behind the solar year. So every actual year that we go through, your lunar calendar loses 11.25 days. This is why every lunar calendar on the planet, whether Jewish or Muslim or any other lunar calendar, you have to add an extra month 7 times in a 19-year cycle to catch the lunar year back up with the solar year. And otherwise, if you don't, you're going to drift back in the seasons. Now, if you keep the feasts on the proper lunar cycle location, like the Jews were commanded in the book of Deuteronomy and other places in the Old Testament to follow the actual lunar cycle. If you follow the actual lunar cycle, the actual lunar year, the actual lunar months, your feasts drift backwards in relationship to the solar year. They're going to drift back 11 days and some change according to the solar year every year. So in 3 years, you're keeping your feasts 30 days off from where they should be kept in the solar year. So you're right by the lunar location if you're trying to keep the feast with the lunar calendar, but you're wrong by the solar location. So it's very problematic. You follow the solar year, you're going to be wrong in some regards. You follow the lunar year and the lunar calendar, and you're going to be wrong in some regards. We have a broken calendar. So here's another aspect where the calendar is in chaos. If you follow the solar year, your calendar year falls 1/4 day behind per actual solar year. So you have to add a leap day every 4 years to catch up. And you're going to have 12 synthetic months instead of 12.3 actual lunar months. So again, you're following synthetic months. You're not following lunar months. This presents great difficulties for keeping the feasts according to the lunar cycles as the Bible teaches. Now, the Gregorian calendar is the most accurate calendar on the planet if you're trying to follow the solar year. It's actually the only solar calendar that we have that's actually working, that follows the solar year or closely follows it. If you try and use the Gregorian calendar, however, to keep the feasts, and you're just counting the moons and trying to follow the Jewish feasts according to the moons, the actual lunar cycles, it'll be kind of okay the first go around, but then you're going to be all messed up because eventually you got the right moon count, but you're in the wrong month. That's a problem. So the calendar is in chaos. So what is the Godzilla that broke the year and broke the calendar? That's a great question. And thankfully, through the study of ancient history, we have a great answer. And if you haven't figured it out yet, this presentation is more a matter of apologetics in history than it is Bible. It gives us a lot of information from outside the Bible that explains things that we see in the Bible. And the Godzilla that changed the calendar was when Mars made its last near pass of the Earth. Now, this is a subject that a lot of people have, maybe some of you have never heard it before, or you've heard about it and have never really read on it. If you want more information on it, a good place to start is K House or Koinonia House, which is Chuck Missler's old ministry. It's still running, still has all of Chuck's material there, at least most of it. Great introductory material on the ancient planets being the ancient gods, the the ancients worshiping the planets, and the planets doing some pretty bizarre things that just would be crazy to us. But Mars and Venus used to be in highly elliptical orbits that would be comet-like orbits, and they would interact with each other, which was in the ancient mythologies, that was the gods fighting or the gods having love affairs, the male and female god. And they often intersected with Earth, which is why they were terrified of Mars, the war god, and why they were terrified of Venus, the two-faced witch, who sometimes was really nice to you and sometimes was really mean to you. But we need to back up here because we're probably getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. And I'm going to back up and do a little, so you can see this sports car is going backwards. He's got his backup lights on. The ancient gods were the heavenly host. You really can't understand ancient religion until you understand that the ancients worshiped the heavenly host. The main gods were the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets. They also had the earth in the picture beyond the main 7. They had a lot of constellations and a lot of interesting stars in their bigger pantheon. But the main pantheon around the world is the 7. These 7 are what the days of the week are named after. Sunday is Sun Day. Monday is Moon Day. Tuesday is Teuton's Day. Wednesday is Woden's Day or Odin's Day. Thursday is Thor's Day. Friday is Frita's Day. Saturday is Saturn's Day. So you see some of them are named after Latin names and some of them are named after Germanic or Norse names. But the 7 days of the week in virtually every culture around the world is named after the 5 visible planets and the sun and the moon. Now, God warned against worshiping the host of heaven. He didn't want mankind worshiping the sun, the moon, the stars. He warned them, for instance, in Deuteronomy 4:19. Now, the 5 visible planets, which I should mention, were Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. I won't go into it tonight, but historically there were 6 visible planets, and around the time of the fall of Troy during the Trojan War, the 6th planet, which was between Mars and Jupiter, was destroyed when I haven't really figured out for absolute certain in ancient history whether it was Venus or Mars that hit it and destroyed it, but that planet was shattered into bajillions of pieces. And so those pieces are now the asteroid belt, long period comets, short period comets, trans-Neptunian objects, satellites or asteroids that orbit in the orbital path of Jupiter, which are called Trojans, and Saturns that orbit in Saturn's path. I don't know the technical name for them. I've long forgotten it. And then there's also an asteroid belt, a smaller one that inside of Saturn. And there's just a ton of pieces of stone out there that are all fractured pieces. They're not cute little round moons. Now, God warned against worshiping the ancient host. His mind was, why are you guys worshiping the sun, the moon, the wandering stars, which are the planets, and the fixed stars? He told him, you are going to inherit all these things. Why are you worshiping them? I've given them to you for your inheritance. Don't fear the things I've given to you for possessions. I created them. Fear me, don't fear the planets. This is why God is called the Lord of hosts. He's not merely the Lord of hosts in the sense he's got a big army of angels in heaven. He's the Lord of the heavenly host. He's God over the heavenly host. Worship God who controls the heavenly host. Worship God who created the heavenly host. Don't worship the heavenly host. Don't worship the planets or the sun or the moon. And because of this idolatry, because of this worship of the sun, the moon, and the planets, the Lord, in the day of the Lord, is going to judge the sun, the moon, and the planets. We see this in Matthew 24:29. We see it in Revelation 6. We see it in Joel 2, Joel 3. We see it in Isaiah 13. We see it in a number of places where the sun is going to get darkened, the moon is going to turn blood red, the stars are going to fall, the heavens are going to roll like a scroll. The whole heavens are going to be judged. And the world is going to understand in that day that God is indeed the Lord of hosts, that God does with the planets what he pleases, that the planets are not gods, that the fallen angels behind the planets and behind planetary worship are not gods, or just created beings, they're angels. And God is going to get all the glory in the day of the Lord, and he's going to maintain all that glory going into the kingdom. So let's look briefly here at Mars and Venus. Mars was the god of war, and Venus was the two-faced witch. They both had elliptical, that is, comet-like orbits that intersected with each other and with Earth. And these intersections were the trysts and the battles between the male and female god in ancient history, in ancient mythology. There was Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Babylonian mythology, Sumerian mythology, Canaanite mythology. And these two were known as Baal and Ashtaroth in the Canaanite religions, and they were known as Ares and Aphrodites in the Greek mythology. Now, Mars had a lot of antics. So, at the time of Exodus, when they worship the bull, you need to understand it mitigates their guilt a little bit. Doesn't mitigate it a lot, because anyone that worships a planet, no matter what it looks like, is guilty of idolatry and guilty of, well, really stupidity. But at the time of the Exodus, Mars was very close to Earth. It wasn't that cute little red dot. Who in the world is going to be terrified by that cute little red dot? Who in the world is going to sacrifice children to that cute little red dot? Makes absolutely no sense. Who's going to be terrified by that little red dot and call it the god of war? That makes absolutely no sense. But at the time of the Exodus, Mars was near to Earth in its elliptical orbit. It appeared in the sky like a great red bull. So he had these massive horns curling up on the crescent, and it looked like a bull's horns. And that's why they were worshiping Mars at that time. That's why they made the bull at that time. And God was pulling the hair out of his head. It's like, why are you guys worshiping the planets? Why are you terrified of the planets? I'm pulling you out of Egypt to get you away from this idolatry, and you're still worshiping the stinking planets. I created the planets. They're your inheritance in eternity. Those planets have no power over you. There's zero truth in astrology. Just trust me. I'm Jehovah. I created these things. I created them for you. I created them to help you keep time and to keep seasons. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of Mars's antics was that it destroyed the planet between Mars and Jupiter. If you start reading the literature on the subject, you're often going to find that planet referred to as Astra. I'm not certain where that name came from. It's just kind of a handle. Perhaps it was an ancient Greek name. But in the different cultures and religions around the world that mention that planet, they give it their own unique names. So just remember that planet, Astra, is just a handle for it. Some people regard it as Rahab, the great dragon, and that may well be the case. Now, another interesting thing is that Venus gashed Mars in one of their combats. And some of the ancients saw this happen. They saw Venus give Mars a gigantic gash. Now, we call this gash Valles Marineris. It's an absolutely massive canyon. I'm going to show you a slide of this canyon in just a minute. But another thing that Mars would do is when it made a near pass to Earth, it would cast rocks and fire and poison upon the Earth. It would create massive, I mean, when you think about the moon and how big a tides it can create when the moon is at its closest place to Earth. Now, I want you to picture in your mind Mars being so close to Earth that it's 7 to 10 times bigger in the sky than the moon. I want you to think about that. Mars used to come so close to Earth that it would create massive problems here on Earth, massive tsunamis and tidal waves, massive crustal tidal waves. It would unleash volcanoes. It would unleash earthquakes. It would unleash plasma discharges. So I just noticed that we're having trouble with the Substack live stream. Again, my apologies. I'm not sure what the issue is, but I'm sure Kristen will figure it out sooner or later. If not for today, then soon enough. But Mars's antics were really crazy. Now, another interesting thing about Mars is that some of the ancients mentioned that Mars had 2 moons. I think this is fascinating. We didn't know Mars had 2 moons because the moons are really tiny. We didn't know that until the very late 1800s. We finally had telescopes big enough to see the 2 moons. And we named them Phobos and Deimos, which is, believe it or not, the names of the 2 moons in Greek mythology, and very similar to the names in many of the ancient mythologies. The ancient Chinese knew that Mars had 2 moons. And so I forget the man that wrote Gulliver's Travels, but when he wrote that book, he wrote in the book that Mars had 2 moons. And when someone asked him, how did you know that Mars had 2 moons? He said, I read it in ancient Chinese mythology. The ancients saw Mars close enough to Earth to know that Mars had 2 moons. Very, very fascinating. Now, the Babylonians called the year of a near pass in Mars, and Mars made near passes every 54 years, and every 108 years, it made a really close pass. And they called these years the year of the fire god, and they called the month of the descent of the fire god. Now, what's also interesting about this in ancient times, in the year of a near pass, Mars, when it made its little wrap around the Earth, would actually pass very close to Earth twice, once in the spring and once in the fall. So the year of the near pass, you got hammered twice. So let's look at that slide I promised you about Mars. So you can see the Valles Marineris on Mars. And you can see I've overlaid a map of the 48 continental states. This canyon is longer than the United States, is wide east to west. And it's from one side to the other is a massive, gigantic stretch. It's huge. This canyon is many times wider and many times deeper than the Grand Canyon. The Valles Marineris. And someday, folks, I hope to put my coffee plantation on Mars under a big glass dome really close to Valles Marineris. And hopefully some of you people will come up and put up pizza shops and donut shops right next to my red planet beans. Now, Mars made its last near pass of the Earth in recent history. Human beings saw the typical fireworks in the heavens. They'd see Mars duking it out with Earth. They'd see the rocks. They would see the fireworks. They would see the sparks. They would see the fireballs that were coming off of Mars. They would see the lightning that would come off of Mars. And they saw the typical manifestations on Earth. They saw that big lightning bolt gouging stuff here on Earth. They saw rocks falling to Earth that were Martian meteorites. But what they didn't see right away, they didn't realize that in this last near pass, which is around 701 BC, they did not realize that the heavens had been rearranged and the year and the month and the seasons have been changed, permanently changed. Well, not eternally permanently changed, but permanently changed for a long, long time. They're going to get readjusted at the second coming. So problems soon arose because after a little while, it just took a few years, that men started to realize their normal equinox and solstice counts weren't corresponding with the new equinox and solstice counts. They would count 90 days from an equinox to a solstice or a solstice to an equinox, but something wasn't right. The sun wasn't lining up in the right spot. And it was a day or 2 or 3 or 4 days behind, or 5 days behind, 6 days behind. And nothing was adding up. And then the seasons began to drift backwards. You'd do your normal day count, and you'd come to when planting season is, and but it was too cold. You were drifting backwards. So spring was drifting backwards into winter. Fall or harvest was drifting backwards into summer. Summer was drifting backwards into spring. And then if you lived in Egypt, every year, give or take a week, you would just count the days from when the Nile River receded. And then you knew you had so many days, give or take a week, until the Nile would rise again, and it would be the flood season or inundation season. And it didn't come. And things were off. The count was off. They also eventually, figured out that Mars's orbit had changed significantly. As they were watching it, they realized it wasn't doing the same pattern it had originally done. It had changed its orbit, and over the centuries, it worked its way back into the orbit that it has now. So with this retreating year, you had a problem. The new year was actually 365 and a quarter days long. These guys didn't know that right away. Within a few years, they figured out there was a problem, but they didn't know exactly what the problem was. And if you didn't know exactly what the problem was, you wouldn't know how to fix it. But they were counting their original 360-day years. So you can see where I got the green box at the top and says the year really ends here with an arrow. But with the green arrow below it, you think the year is ending here at 360 days. And so you are falling backwards 5 days in a year. You go 6 years and you have fallen back more than a full month. You've fallen back more than 30 days. You go back 18 years, you fall back 3 months. This is hugely problematic. Now, with this year being all messed up, the actual length of the year got completely messed up. This is why around 700 BC, all around the world, we see Stonehenge structures, we see rock rings, and we see mound systems that sprung up around the world. They were using them to calibrate the actual year so that they could calibrate a calendar that worked with the actual length of the year. So the best minds in ancient history, the scientists and the astronomers, were racking their brains like crazy, trying to figure out the actual length of the year. Because until they figured out the length of the year and nailed it, you had to nail it within a couple hours. If you couldn't do that, then you couldn't figure out where your solstices and your equinoxes were, and you couldn't figure out then where your feasts were. And you couldn't figure out, it was just a mess. Religion got thrown off. The civil year got thrown off. Everything was thrown off. And so they were facing the question, how long was the year? And when were the equinoxes and solstices? Well, science came to the rescue. Science always comes to the rescue, right? Thales determined that Earth's orbit increased from 360 to 365.25 days. Solon calculated that the lunar month decreased from 30 to 29.53 days. And it was also determined by the scientists of the day that Mars's orbit had decreased from 720 days to 687 days. So it was a lot shorter orbit. And so there was a few variables probably. We'll find out in eternity exactly what variables were changed here. But its orbit went in the direction of what it has today. Now, when Mars had a 720-day orbit, it was in a perfect 2-to-1 harmonic ratio with Earth. So that Earth's year was 360 days, Mars' year was 720 days. That was a harmonic ratio. Now, what's interesting is Thales, according to ancient history, was the first one to determine that the year was 365.25 days. Now, revisionist history, which is popular in our evolutionary believing universities, they look at ancient history, they don't believe it, they treat ancient history with the same disdain that they treat the Bible. And they say, oh, those ancient men, they were so brain dead, they were so backwards, that they lived in this fantasy that the year was 360 days long. They didn't really figure out the year was actually 365 and a quarter days. This is just, it's garbage, folks. It's simply not true. And we're going to look at some reasons for this in a little while. Let me just say here, the ancient Sumerians and the ancient Babylonians used advanced algebra and advanced geometry and what some would regard even as pre-calculus to calculate the orbits of the planets and the orbits of comets. And they would figure out when a comet was going to return. These guys were not brain dead. They were not slow. They weren't stupid. They were insanely intelligent. So let's look at the explanation for what happened according to ancient Greek and Egyptian testimony. This Plutarch recorded this story in his Moralia, Isis, in the section called Isis and Osiris, when he's talking about Egyptian mythology. And he says Hermes was playing at draughts with the moon, in other words, playing with dice, and he won from her the 70th part of each of her periods of illumination. A period of illumination is a month. So he got 1/70th of the month and intercalated them as an addition to the 360 days. So let's look at this math. And there's some of this is coming from Hesiod too. So the 30-day month was shortened to 1/70th, which gives us a 0.42 day loss per month. A 0.42 day loss per month times 12 months equals 5.14 days. You'll see that that's real close to modern calculations. It's not exact, but it's real close. We call it 5.25 days, 5 1/4. 360 days plus 5.14 days is 365.14 days. Notice that the lunar loss is very close to the solar gain. Now, when it comes to the timing of the year length change, Velikovsky calculates it to be 687 BC. Patton calculates it to be 701 BC. Wong calculates it to be 713 BC. And most scholars who are calculating the time of Hezekiah and Sennacherib, who are not catastrophe scholars, they either never heard of it or they don't believe it. They just do pure chronology according to how they handle it, and they come up with 701 BC. So the more I've looked at the evidence, the more I think that 701 BC is probably the right year, or really, really close to the right year. But all these numbers are in the ballpark. These are relatively minor differences in chronology. All agree that this event happened at this era of time. So let's look at the timing of the year length change according to the biblical testimony. In the Bible, we see in 2 Kings 20, verses 1 through 6, that Hezekiah was sick, and the Lord promised to spare him and deliver the city. We also see in 2 Kings 20, verses 8 through 11, that the shadow on the sundial went back 10 steps. We also read about the sundial account in Isaiah 38, verses 7 through 8. We read a little bit more on Hezekiah in 2 Kings 19 and 2 Chronicles 32. So I'll leave this up just for a second if you want to write these passages down, and so that you can go back and investigate this and look at this a little bit more. I think this is an absolutely fascinating subject. Now, I did see an interesting remark in the notes here, and it brings up a fascinating subject. It's in the chat. It says, "Won't it be nice to never worry about time anymore?" And you're right. We won't have to worry about time anymore. But I'm convinced that there will be time in eternity. There's going to be seed time and harvest, summer and winter for all of eternity. There's going to be day and night forever in eternity. The sun, the moon, the stars, according to the Old Testament prophets, are for eternity, and that we'll be measuring time for eternity. But the calendar will no longer be broken, and it'll work perfectly. And the year will no longer be broken. It will work perfectly. Anyway, if you're interested in that subject, I do have a video, Time in Eternity, very fascinating video. I think it's worth watching. It brings out a lot of information that I think many Bible students overlook. I think I prove from the scriptures and from just common sense looking at the new creation that there will be time in eternity. At any rate, let's move on. Let's go on to the sundial. Now, you'll notice the sundial that I have here is not your standard single-day sundial. The single-day sundial has very short hours in the middle of the day, from like 10, 11 in the morning till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, are really long hours. Really short hours, and then they get a little longer as you go in the afternoon. And when you get to the early morning hours and to the late evening hours, the hours are really long. So it was a difficult sundial to calibrate and use. But this sundial here, you'll notice that the hours of the day are equally spaced. And how does this happen? Well, if you think about a sundial, that little piece that stands up in the middle is called the gnomon, the Gnomon, gnomon. And on a normal sundial, that's fixed in its place, and it works for every day. But that's why, because it's a fixed gnomon, the sun is moving north and south, and it changes the way the shadows fall on the sundial. But with this sundial here, which is called the analemmatic sundial, you can move the post, the gnomon, north throughout the year until you get to the winter solstice, and then you move it south until the summer solstice. And some of them only move that gnomon once a week, but some of the more sophisticated calendars moved it every single day. So if you're moving it every day, you'd have 180 holes that you were using. If you moved, 180, you might even have 181, depending upon how you did it. But if you're just moving it weekly, you'd only have to have 52 holes. But anyway, because you're moving the gnomon, that little piece that casts a shadow, the hours of the day on this sundial are the same length, no matter what time of the day it is. Now, on this sundial, you're actually able to measure years and not just days, and not just the hours of the days. So on this sundial, when the shadow went back 10 steps, it went and cast a shadow on the same place that the shadow would have been casted 5 days earlier. I think this is really fascinating. So when the sundial went back 10 steps on this analemmatic sundial, it was going back 5 days. So it didn't go back just a couple hours, it went back 5 days. And these ancient sundials of this style that had the moving gnomon, they're found in Scythia all the way back to 1500 BC. So it's an ancient sundial. So let's look at some more information on when this change happened. The timing of the year length changed happened under King Hezekiah. And here we have more information from King Berodach Baladan, who was the king of Babylon. Now, the king of Babylon asked Hezekiah about the wonder. I got that in bold red. It's miracle, about the wonder or miracle in the land. This is 2 Chronicles 32:31. Now, there were only 2 miracles in the proximity there. There was a miracle of the sundial going backwards, which I don't think was a miracle only for the king and that it didn't affect anything else. It was a problem that affected the whole world. When you look at ancient history, the whole world at that time had their sundials going backwards. It threw their calendars off. Around the world, 701 BC, Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, South America, the Polynesian Islands, everywhere in the world, the calendar got changed or had to get changed because the year got changed. So this miracle was the sundial going backwards, but there was one other miracle. The king of Babylon probably heard about the 185,000 Assyrian soldiers that were killed. I think a blast from heaven came down, an electromagnetic blast, and just turned their hearts off. Now, what's interesting about this, the Talmud in the Midrash talk about the manner in which the Assyrian host was destroyed. It gives us extra biblical information that's passed down by tradition. And it tells us that a blast fell from heaven from the sky on the camp of Sennacherib, and it was not a flame. It was a consuming blast. And their souls were burnt, but their clothes were not burnt. Their clothes were intact. And the phenomenon was accompanied by a tremendous noise. And so I found this first reference in Velikovsky and his Worlds in Collision. Now, rabbinical sources also indicate that at the same time, there was a disturbance in the movement of the sun that happened at the same time. So it wasn't just the 185,000 Assyrian soldiers getting killed. The sun got dealt an interesting blow. Now, we've had some phenomenon in recent history associated with comets in which electromagnetic phenomena actually killed men without burning their clothing. So, for instance, in the Chicago fire and the Peshtigo fire, which both happened on October 8th, 1871, there were people that were found dead. Their clothes were not burned. Now, this is really bizarre. Their clothes were not burned, but any metal objects on their person were melted and warped. So their pocket watches were warped and melted. And if they had a cross around their neck, that chain and the cross were melted and warped. But their clothes were not burned. It's an electromagnetic phenomenon. And apparently would just turn their hearts off. Had a very similar thing happen with the New Madrid earthquake in December 16th, 1811, where not only did they have this massive earthquake, but a dark dust fell down from the heavens, and the oxygen level went insanely low. Men could not keep their lamps burning. It was dark there for a few hours. And men were dying of asphyxiation, and men had the same kind of problems happen that we saw happen at the Chicago fire and the Peshtigo fire, that metal objects were softened and burnt or warped or melted, but their clothes were not burned. And very similar things happened with the Moscow fire in 1812 when Napoleon was forced to retreat. Now, the New Madrid earthquake was associated with the Great Comet of 1811, and the Moscow fire was associated with the Pons Brook comet. I don't remember the name of the comet that was associated with the Chicago fire and the Peshtigo fire. Very fascinating subject, though. Here's another argument for the timing of the year-length change. Let's look at Thales, the Greek philosopher, or we would call him a scientist now. Thales of Miletus was born somewhere around 625 BC, and he died somewhere around 545 BC. He's recorded as the first to calculate the length of the year at 365.25 days. Now, if we trust ancient history, we trust that all the nations around the world tell us they used to have a 360-day year, and then the year changed, and they had to recalibrate the year, and they were forced to add 5 days to the year. Then we know that Thales, when he calculated the length of the year, this is a reference to him being the first one to calculate the length of the year after the great calendar reset. And we know that the ancients did not count the year wrong. They were able to use advanced math, advanced algebra, advanced geometry to calculate comet orbits in 2500 BC. So 1800 years later, they've got 1800 more years of experience with science. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Whoops, getting my finger slide and my mouse slides all mixed up. So here's another argument for the timing of the year length change being around 700 BC, 701 BC. The Vedas, which are the Brahmanic literature from 1500 BC to 500 BC, feature all kinds of details about astronomical phenomena. They talk about comets and planets and the orbits of the planets and the orbits of the sun and the moon and the length of the year. They talk about all kinds of stuff. And they mention the stars and the constellations. And they mention the catastrophes that ended the Gold Age, the Silver Age, and the Bronze Age. By the way, the end of the Gold Age lines up with the judgment that fell on the Tower of Babel. The end of the Silver Age lines up with the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah at the time of Abraham. The Bronze Age lines up with the judgment that fell on Egypt at the time of the Exodus. But in all this stuff that's mentioned in the ancient Vedic literature, the ancient Indian literature, they never mention the 5 extra days. They never mention intercalating them or adding them to the end of the year. They don't mention a 365-day year. So we've got 1,000 years of Vedic literature, and it knows nothing but a 360-day year. Here's another slide on the timing of the year length change. And this is using Velikovsky's date. If you use someone else's chronology, it would line up with 701 BC. But in Velikovsky, we read that in the year 687, on the day Sin Mao, which is March 23rd, the 5 planets left their courses, the stars fell like rain, and the earth shook. And this was found in writings that are ascribed to Confucius. In Chinese writings called the Bamboo Books, we find the exact same account. The 5 planets left their courses, the stars fell like rain, and the earth shook. We also read that the sun passed backwards, that is retrograde motion, through 3 solar mansions at this time. So the Chinese are recording that the sun went backwards. That's the same thing that happened in the biblical account with Hezekiah. I just find this stuff fascinating. Over and over again, I see that when I study ancient history, I see that ancient history agrees with the Bible. Now, they're going to have their own problems, a little of interpretation here and a little interpretation there, but ancient history in general agrees with the Bible. This is why when you study ancient history in a secular university, they give you revisionist history the same way they give you revisionist Bible. They don't trust ancient history any more than they trust the Bible, because both of them agree with each other. God wrote the book of history and he wrote the book of the Bible. Now, revisionism reigns amongst the academics. The academics recognize that the ancients believed in a 360-day year. But they assume that the ancients were rounding or idealizing the length of the year. Now, why do they do this? Because they assume the uniformitarian position that the length of the year hasn't changed for at least 70 million years, if not 700 million years, if not 12 billion years. And they deny the strong evidence of observational science that a recent catastrophe changed the length of the year and the length of the month. And folks, this is the same unbelief as the denial of creation, the denial of the fall, the denial of the flood, and the denial of coming judgment. So revisionism ends up dissing the ancients. They regard the ancients as not much above knuckle-dragging Neanderthals who couldn't figure out the length of the year, or sometimes they regard them as men who unscientifically tried to force a 365 and a quarter day year into a 360-day calendar. Either way, they're dissing them. The problem is they're ignoring hard scientific evidence when they do this. Just simple observational science. If we trust what the ancients say about the length of the year, they tell us that they around the world, not just one or two places, they tell us that the length of the year was literally 30 days, from new moon to new moon, from full moon to full moon. They tell us that the moon waxed for 15 days and waned for 15 days. They tell us that there were 90 days between a solstice and an equinox, between an equinox and a solstice. They tell us there were 180 days between solstices. They tell us there were 180 days between equinoxes. They tell us that there were 360 days from a winter solstice to a winter solstice, and from a spring equinox to a spring equinox. There's hard historical evidence around the world across many, many centuries from many, many cultures about the fact, the time, and the cause of the year length change. And there's much evidence that the year was originally 360 days, which explains why they had a 360-day year calendar. Now, as soon as we go to the ground of simple observational science, this whole thing makes a whole lot more sense. You don't have to be an ancient scientist to figure out there's a problem with the year length. If you had literally had a 360-day year that you'd been using for generation after generation after generation, and then you had these fireworks in the heavens, and the length of the year changed, you couldn't live in a fantasy very long, because in 1 year, your calendar is going to be off a month. I mean, in 6 years, your calendar will be off in a month. And in 20 years, you would go from planting on May 15th to planting around February 14th in the snow. You start out planting late spring and follow your same year count, counting 360-day years, and you're going to end up planting in February in the snow. This is observational science that no farmer can miss. It'll only take you a handful of years, 5 or 10 years, before you realize this isn't just a fluke of nature. Something seriously wrong is going on. So even farmers could figure out there was a problem. Now, the original solution that we find around the world is you had the original 12-month, 30-day month calendar of 360 days, and everybody added 5 years at the end of the year. The Zoroastrians added 5 days. The Babylonians added 5 days. The Greeks added 5 days. The Persians added 5 days. The Egyptians added 5 days. And the Mayans and Incas and Aztecs, they all added 5 days at the end of the year. They all did this. It was very simple. It was the simplest solution. And eventually they all started adding a leap year too. But this brings us to one of our original questions. Which calendar is original? Is the Essene calendar the original calendar? Is the Jewish calendar the original calendar? Or is the Gregorian calendar the original calendar? Well, surprise, the answer is none of the above. The Gregorian calendar is the newest kid on the block. The Jewish calendar is more recent than the Essene calendar. The Essene calendar may well have been the original Jewish calendar, and the Jews were not the original Jewish calendar all the way back to Moses, but the original Jewish calendar after the calendar collapsed around 701 BC. And that we're going to look in a moment at the Essene calendar has some very unique features that it's if you're trying to average out the lunar year and the solar year problems, that's the best one. But anyway, the original calendar was a 360-day year calendar. We don't have that today. Now, which calendar is best? Which calendar is the most accurate? Well, best at what? Most accurate at what? If you're talking about being the best at following the solar year, your only option is the Gregorian calendar. There is no competition. The Gregorian calendar gets off one day every 4 years. That's pretty accurate. But if you're talking about following the lunar months, let's say you want to follow the lunar month because you're a Muslim, or you're trying to follow the lunar month because you're a Jew and you want to observe your feasts according to how they're prescribed to be observed in the scriptures. Now your only option is the Jewish calendar. But you're going to have problems. Now, see, you're required to actually observe the month, the real lunar month. And you're keeping the feasts according to an observable new moon. Not a synthetic new moon, an actual new moon. That brings up some problems. Because the Jewish calendar, just like the Muslim calendar and every lunar calendar on the planet, falls behind 11 and a quarter days a year. It's a 354-day year calendar. And the months alternate between 30 days and 29 days, because you can't have a 29 and a half day month. So it's 30, 29, 30, 29, back and forth, averages 29 and a half. Now, it's possible to keep the feasts according to actual lunar cycles and actual new moons. The problem is you're going to drift back 11 and a quarter days in a year. So 7 times in a 19-year cycle, you have to add an extra month to the new year. Now, this might sound odd to me the first time I heard it. But when they add an extra month of Adar to the year, the one they add is not Adar 2, it's Adar 1. All right? Now, so if you're going to want to follow the feasts, you have to follow the Jewish calendar. Now, the best calendar at innovation, the best calendar at trying to harmonize the problems and deficiencies with the lunar calendar and adjust them to the solar calendar and have get some variation of a lunar calendar that's closer to the solar calendar. The Essene calendar is the most accurate in that regard. Now, it's not a true solar calendar, and it's definitely not a true lunar calendar. It's kind of a um, innovation, really. It's a hybrid calendar, and it actually has more in common with the original ancient calendar that took the 360 days and just added 5 days to it. What they did, instead of adding 5 days to it, they were very innovative. They only added 4 days to it. That gives you 364 days in the year. Now, 364 days divides by exactly 52 weeks. 7 times 52 is 364. This was a very unique innovation, and it was really ingenious. And so what had happened is, when you observe the Jewish feasts on this calendar, well, you weren't observing them according to the actual lunar cycles as prescribed in the Bible. So you were misstepping on the actual lunar cycle part. On the other hand, you were keeping those lunar feasts closer to where they should have been kept in the solar year, because your feasts are not drifting back in the year until you're a month off and you don't have to catch up. This calendar would only get off 1 week in a year, well, actually a little bit more than that, so that every 28 years it had to add 2 weeks to the year to catch all the way back up. But it never drifted as far back as the Masoretic calendar. And so the Masoretic calendar was right on the solar cycle observation, and but it drifted back on the, and they were right on the lunar month observation, but they drifted back on the solar year. The Essene calendar had to use synthetic months instead of actual lunar months, and so they had a problem there, but they were more accurate according to the solar year, and their feasts didn't drift back in the year. So neither one of them is ideal. They both have their place. Personally, I think if you want to keep the Jewish feasts according to the Bible, you're going to be forced to use the Jewish calendar and drift backwards, and then add an extra Adar 7 times in a 19-year cycle. So let me bring up a little bit more on the Essene calendar here. There's 2 models for the Essene calendar. The first model is you just take 360 days and you add 4 days at the end of the year for 364 days. The second model is you have a 90-day block with a 1-day season break, another 90-day block with a 1-day season break, like spring, summer, etc. 90 days with the fall break, 90 days with the winter break. So you got 90 plus 1, 90 plus 1, 90 plus 1, 90 plus 1, it's 364 days. So you got 3 30-day months separated by a single day, which marks the season. Now, neither variation here actually follows the actual lunar months, and they don't follow the actual lunar feasts. They're following synthetic months and synthetic feasts. And the method will still get 1 1/4 days off per year. It needs to get corrected every 7 years, and then once an extra week in every 28 years, where you add a second week. So this brings us to the question of which calendar is God's calendar? Which calendar is authorized? Well, all of them. God is using the solar calendar and the solar year. The solar year is the baseline that all calendars adhere to, and all calendars must correct to the year calendar. God's using the Jewish lunar calendar, and God honors those that are using the Jewish lunar calendar for observing the feasts. He's honoring it even though it lags behind 11.25 days per year, and you got to add a full month 7 times in a 19-year cycle. But at least you're keeping the feast on the actual lunar cycle. Now, God also honors the Essene calendar. It was an innovative way to try and harmonize the lunar cycles with the solar year. In some ways, it's actually much more innovative than the Gregorian calendar. And even though it's less accurate than the Gregorian calendar for the solar year, if you're trying to keep the Jewish feasts those feasts are not going to drift as far back in the solar year as they do on the Masoretic calendar. So I think there's a general principle here. I think God is honoring all these efforts to use a broken calendar in a broken year, in a broken solar system, to try and honor God. I think he honors all of them. I think he's going to honor our hearts. And when we come to us as folks that don't keep the Jewish feasts, it's interesting to observe the Essene calendar and interesting to observe the Jewish calendar, just to be familiar with them. But we're following the Gregorian calendar for the most part. If you're a Jew, then you're going to have to deal with the issue of which calendar should you use, the Masoretic calendar or the Essene calendar. And the vast majority of them use the Masoretic calendar, simply because it allows them to follow the actual lunar cycles and have an actual visual observation of the new moon. Now, what's interesting here is, and I keep moving the wrong mouse here instead of my mouse finger pad, there's going to be fireworks in the heavens again. And we're getting real close to being done here, folks. We're winding this up. But there's going to be a near pass of Mars, a near pass of Venus, the morning star, that's going to bring fire on Gog and Magog, the army, and on Magog and on the Isles. And there's going to be a near pass of the great red dragon, which is Mars, in the middle of the week. We see this in Revelation 12. So that when there's the sign in the heavens where you see the great red dragon casting a third of the stars to earth, that's a sign in the heavens. It's going to happen at the exact same time that Satan is literally cast out of heaven and 1/3 of the angels with him. And they're going to be cast down to earth. So you see a sign in the heavens at the time of the spiritual reality here on earth. Now, what's actually going to happen, these are not actual stars landing on the physical surface of the earth. The earth is going to do a polar shift. It's going to roll so that 1/3 of the stars in the northern hemisphere are going to end up in the southern hemisphere. 1/3 of the stars in the southern hemisphere are going to end up in the northern hemisphere. And we are going to see signs in the heavens, the signs that we see in Revelation 6. Now, thankfully, we are not going to see them from earth. We're going to be watching them from balcony seats in heaven while we're watching big screen TV, prophetic updates, and drinking our Heaven Bucks coffee. But down here on earth, they're going to look up in the heavens and they're going to see the most terrifying signs in the heavens that they've ever seen. The sun's going to go dark. The moon is going to turn blood red. The stars are going to fall from the heavens. The earth is going to roll. The planets are going to roll like the words on a scroll. The whole heavens are going to roll like words on a scroll. And the planets are going to be shaken out of their orbits. It's going to be terrifying. This is why Luke says, Luke 21, men's hearts shall fail them for fear of the things coming upon the earth from the heavens. We read in Isaiah 24:20, the earth is going to wobble and weave in her orbit. And I see someone saying that outer space is fake, the earth is flat. Please, please, please go read the stuff I've written on the flat earth and watch my videos on the flat earth. Flat earth is confusing science, falsely so-called, with real science. And it ends up calling all real science bogus science. So you're ending up calling real physics, real math, real geometry, real trigonometry, real atmospheric science. You're calling in all of that. You're just calling it bogus lies. Folks, anyone can stand on the shore of an ocean or a lake and watch a ship sink below the horizon. It does not shrink to a dot where you see the whole ship shrinking to a dot as it recedes into the horizon. You see it sinking below the horizon until all you see is the stacks or the sails, and then it's gone. Anybody can observe this. This is observational science. 99 times out of 100, that's what you see. If you have a situation where there's a thermal inversion or some kind of atmospheric change, you can see a reflection of the ship. Sometimes that reflection will have the ship right side up. Sometimes it will have the ship upside down. but 99 times out of 100, just simple observational science, the ship will drop over the visible horizon. The fact of the matter is, if Earth was flat, you could put a massive telescope on the shores of the Pacific Ocean anywhere you want, California or Oregon, and you could look across the ocean and you could count the ships in the harbor in Beijing. People have tried it with massive telescopes. They haven't used the biggest telescopes on Earth, but they've used very big telescopes. You cannot see across the Pacific Ocean, folks. You can't even see across the Atlantic Ocean. No telescope looks across the Atlantic Ocean. At any rate, when the Earth rolls and stars are going to change, planets are going to change in their orbits, this is going to be the new heavens and the new Earth. And the good news is the calendar problem is going to be fixed. We're going back to the original 360-day calendar. The solar year and the lunar year are going to be in perfect harmony, in perfect sync. They won't be 1 second off. In fact, you go out 1 million years into the future, and when God has aligned these up, they're going to be absolutely perfect to the second, to the 10th of a second, to the millionth of a second. There won't need to be even a 1 second adjustment in the calendar in 1 million years. Perfection. That's what God is. That's what God does. Now, how do we know this? Because in the book of Revelation, we see that there's 1,260 days in 3.5 years, that is in 42 months. We're right back to the same thing we saw in the book of Genesis and the flood, where 5 months is 150 days. We also know in Acts 3:21 that there's going to be the times of the restitution of all things. Everything that's broken in the universe is going to be fixed. All the extinct dinosaurs are coming back. All the extinct plants are coming back. All the extinct birds are coming back. All the extinct animals are coming back. You'll get to see brontosauruses, T-Rexes, mastodons, mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, as well as passenger pigeons. We also are going to see the complete removal of the curse. The 365 and a quarter day year, folks, is a delayed aspect of the curse, just like extinct animals are a delayed aspect of the curse, just like development of new forms of parasites and new forms of bacteria and new forms of algae that are harmful to human beings. These are all delayed aspects of the curse. And so the 365 and a quarter day year is a delayed aspect of the curse. Now, I also suspect that Mars and Venus are both going to have slightly elliptical orbits in the new heavens and the new Earth. They're going to go back to a harmonious relationship with the Earth. Mars will be 720, Earth will be 360, and Venus will have a relationship, a corresponding relationship to Earth and to Mars. But their orbits will be slightly elliptical so that Earth's magnetic field is charged on a regular basis, so that we have an ideal electromagnetic field around the Earth, protects us from the harmful rays of the sun. But these near passes won't be near enough to create the problems that we have with the ancient near passes. All right, folks, this brings us to the end of this presentation. And I forgot to fix this slide. Some of the slides that work great in my PowerPoint presentations, there's something about the way that I formatted them that I have to go back and fix them if I want them to work here. And I forgot to fix this one. I didn't catch it. Anyway, eyes wide open, brain engaged, heart on fire. And thank you for joining me tonight. So let's move on to our Q&A time. We had a fairly long presentation, but we got time for Q&A. So let me close down my questions there. Let me open up questions here. Go into Soothkeep. And unanswered questions. How about I'll do questions? Wow, we got a ton of questions. Whoa, man. Are these all questions from today? Are these, the questions are starting at 68. Where am I supposed to start? Oh, I see they're backwards. Okay. But we don't have 1 through 10. Oh, wait a minute. I see. Hold on. I see what's going on here. So questions started at 1. Oh, June 16th, new questions. That's what's going on. So I'll do the new questions first, then we'll back up and do older questions. All right. Okie dokie. Question number 1. Some preachers say you should never talk to Satan. Some say you should say things like "Begone, Satan," like Jesus. What are your thoughts on this? Well, we certainly don't want to carry on extended conversations with Satan. The example in Scripture is "the Lord rebuke thee." We see in James that we should submit ourselves unto God, resist the devil, and he will flee. I don't think it's wrong to say, "I resist thee and rebuke thee in the name of Jesus." I oftentimes in my prayer say stuff like, "In the name of Jesus," not any Jesus, the Jesus who's God manifest in flesh, the Jesus who spoke the universe into existence, who's the eternal Son of God, who's the creator and sustainer of the universe, who's God manifest in flesh, who's came down here to earth, died for the sins of mankind, who rose again, who's at the right hand of the Father, who is our high priest in heaven. In the name of this Jesus, I rebuke and resist all the powers and all the principalities that are trying to defile me, discourage me, distract me. Just I rebuke all of you in the name of Jesus. And this is some variation or another of this is a common prayer for me. I find that when I use the name of Jesus, especially when I clarify which Jesus, I'm not talking about the Buddha Jesus of the ecumenicals. I'm not talking about the Jesus of the Catholic Church or the Jesus of the Mormon Church. I'm talking about the Jesus, the real Jesus. And that Jesus has power in his name. So I don't really talk to Satan other than to rebuke him and reprove him in the manner I just mentioned. What's my opinion on Ken Johnson saying another 50 years yet? Well, talking to Brother Ken, it seems to me like he's saying he's not sure that we got another 50 years left. But he is fairly certain, based on his research, that the Essene chronology, not the Essene calendar, the Essene chronology has another 50 years left. Because according to their chronology, we've just recently entered the last Jubilee cycle. So there's 50 years in this cycle. And that's where he's going with that. And the second coming may be way deep at the end of that cycle, could be earlier in the cycle, but he's just presenting what he sees in the Essenes that we are entering the last Jubilee cycle. Now, personally, I don't do a whole lot with Shemitah cycles and Jubilee cycles. I don't believe they have anything to do with the rapture of the church. They have a whole lot to do with God's dealings with Israel. But here's the rub. Probably in the last 10 years, we've had over and over and over again people giving us Shemitah cycles and people giving us Jubilee cycles. And they have all this cool math from the Old Testament and from Strong's numbers and from Hebrew numbers and from all kinds of cool, mysterious arguments. And we're for sure this is the Jubilee, and it all falls apart. Folks, we simply do not know where we're at in God's Jubilee cycle. We absolutely do not know for sure. And the Shemitah cycles, they were agricultural cycles. They were only for when Israel was in the land. When Israel was booted out of the land, that you could try and keep track of the Shemitah cycles if you were, but they were primarily for the land. We don't really know where we're at in God's Shemitah cycles either. So the best we can do, just like we're working with the broken calendar to do our dead level best, God looks down from heaven. I think he appreciates the efforts of those that are trying to figure out where we are in the Shemitah calendar and where we are on the Jubilee cycle, and that's okay. But as Gentiles in the Christian church, we don't have to be too caught up in those, except for merely understanding some of what's going on with Judaism. And neither us nor the Jews need to figure out when the Lord's coming back. Because when he comes back, he's coming back to fix the broken things. He's not coming back on timing we can calculate according to the broken things. Our calendar's broken. Our time counting is broken. Our Shemitah cycles are broken. Our Jubilee cycles are broken. But when God comes back, the way he works with the solar system and the way he's going to work with the calendar year, when he comes back, he's bringing everything right back to a perfect reset on day one in the kingdom. So we go in day one in the kingdom, we're going right into a brand new Jubilee cycle. And there's going to be 20 Jubilees in the 1,000-year kingdom. Anyway, that was a long rant. Question 3, what do I think will happen to America after the rapture? Personally, I believe that America is not going to be crushed and broken and become a second-rate nation. I believe that America is going to be a significant force in the revived, reconstituted Roman Empire. Now, I can't tell you for absolute certain whether America is going to be the little horn that runs the whole thing, that is the head, or whether it's going to be part of the body, or whether it's going to be just a secondary part in the tail, but it'll be part of the Roman Empire. It would be completely ridiculous for the deep state, the global cabal that's going to run the New World Order. It would be ridiculous for them to crush, break, and destroy America's economic power, military power, her industrial power, her technological edge. That would be far better to be exploited. And I think that's really what's happening right now and what we're going to continue to see happen. We're going to be taken over from the inside, so we're no longer the America that we used to be. And we're completely taken over with New World Order nonsense and absorbed into the Roman Empire. Now, I'm not going to be a bit surprised if America proves to be the little horn that dominates the 10 toes of the Roman Empire, and then the Roman Empire dominates the whole world in 10 pieces. But, folks, that's just tracking what we see with New York City and Washington, D.C. right now. You know, Washington, D.C. could be the political capital of the New World Order, and New York City could be the economic capital of the new Babylonian New World Order. But that's just tracing the dots as we see right now. If something disastrous happens to America and New York City and Washington, D.C. are wiped out, and this thing goes on a little while longer than we think, you could see other cities rise up in Europe or in the Middle East and be the dominant superpower cities, the political capital and the economic capital. So we can hold our ideas on who we think these cities are, you know, whether we think it's Neom, whether we think it's Brussels, Belgium, whether we think it's London, whether we think it's New York City, whether we think there's 2 cities or 3 cities. Just hold your ideas loosely. And after the rapture, we'll all sit down and figure out who won the football pool. Did the flood speed the rotation of the earth? I am not certain. I've heard the theory that the flood could speed the rotation of the earth. It's confusing to me trying to follow the physics, how the water coming out from the earth and going to the surface could speed the rotation of the earth. It seems more likely to me that it would probably slow it a little bit. But it would be interesting to either read something written by a physicist who can present a strong argument for it and just walk you through the math at a level you can understand. Personally, I think that when Mars made its last near pass of Earth, it sped our rotation up just a little bit. And that sped up rotation lengthened the year. We end up with more days in the year, and therefore we have days got to be added to the month. Okay, here's a 4-part question on salvation. So part 1 says, Ephesians 1 says those who believe are sealed with the Holy Spirit, and that this is the guarantee of their inheritance. And yes, I definitely believe that. Part 2 says some stress that receiving the Holy Spirit should occur with an evident feeling, emotional experience, gifting, or fanfare, yet not all believers experience this at first. Yeah, most people I know sense something when they're born again. They can feel that there's a change, but it's not this powerful, lasting experience. And I've known people who just make a conscious, intelligent decision to serve the Lord, and it takes a little while for it to catch on. They realize, hey, I'm different. I'm changed. And people say, hey, you're changed. So we don't want to put a huge premium on emotions and feelings. Faith is your heart trusting the truth revealed to you by the Lord Jesus in the gospel and in the Word of God. How can we, here's part 4, how can we help those? Oh, part 3 says this can become a source of doubt that they are not saved or don't have the Spirit, or that they need to do something further to receive this guarantee of our inheritance. And yep, that's a problem. So part 4 says, how can we help those who struggle with assurance in this area? Oh, just go to the basic scriptures. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. It's just simply trusting the scriptures. And we read in John 10, all who come unto me, or he's going to receive them. That come unto me, all ye who were weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest for your souls. All who come unto me, I will in no wise cast out. Is there a watertight barrier between space and Earth's atmosphere, with this being the windows in heaven opened? Not literally, not if you're thinking there's like a lake up there. No, it's interesting, in some of the languages around the world, in some of the ancient cultures, they talk about the heavens being a sea. And we do know there's some ground for this. The word for hydrogen is from Greek, and it looks like it says form of water. It's hydrogen, and it really is one of the roots of water, right? And so the heavens are filled with hydrogen ions. The upper atmosphere, hydrogen ions are in it, and the entire expanse of heaven, the 3-dimensional expanse, which goes on for infinity and eternity, is filled with hydrogen ions and some other ions too. And so there's that water hydrogen connection, and the ancients apparently understood this. Okay. Lee, have you taken into account the 2 supernatural events of God for why calendars went off, such as the sun standing still for a day and the sundial going back by 10 degrees? Yeah, the sundial going back by 10 degrees is not the daily sundial going back by 10 degrees. It's the analemmatic sundial, which can measure days and years, and it went back 10 steps, which would, in this circumstance, took the whole world back 5 1/4 days. The sun standing still for a day, many creation apologists have presented the information that very clearly brings that out in history, and that would also be an offset in a calendar, but it would be more in the sense of one day was lengthened. Because all around the world, from the time that the sun stood still in the day of Joshua, you have a few ancient cultures which mention a long day. but no ancient culture mentions the change in the length of the year. Why would God, since he created the heavenlies, allow the planets to collide? Well, they never actually typically physically collided, but they would come close enough that their Roche limits, the gravitational attraction, would explode. For instance, Astra, the smaller one. And they often would bounce off each other's electromagnetic fields. But why would he allow the planets collide? Well, this is really the same question as God created the earth. Why would he bring a curse upon the earth? God created man. Why would he allow man to fall into sin? Why would he allow men to end up in hell? The judgments that we see in the heavens are often associated with the typological representations of problems that we have here on earth. And so they go corresponding hand in hand. What we see in the heavens goes along with God's redemption program here on earth. Okay, where did I get my source about Mars? Great question. From literally dozens of books and ancient sources. If you start doing research in what's called a plasma universe cosmology or electric universe cosmology, a lot of the guys in that field of science, which represents about maybe 5% of the bona fide scientists in the world that are dealing with astrophysics and astronomy and cosmology, they're either partially or entirely electric universe. These ideas are actually spreading quite widely in the realm of science. And you can study it in men that study ancient history. You find this information in men that study ancient North American mythologies and traditions from the Native Americans. You find it in books about those that study the Incas and the Aztecs. You find it in books about people that study the ancient Indian writings and beliefs on astronomy and cosmology, books on Babylonian and Assyrian and Akkadian and Sumerian astronomy and cosmology and history and mythology. It's around the world at numerous levels, numerous data point subjects. And there's probably thousands of books on this subject that a person could read. I've only examined a smattering of them. Okay, did any of these smart people get that knowledge from some of the fallen angels? So I'm not sure what smart people you're referring to. If you're referring to the revisionist experts who believe in evolution in the universities, they absolutely got that knowledge from the fallen angels. If we're referring to men figuring out how to recalculate the length of the year, yeah, they may have gotten that from the fallen angels too. The fallen angels gave technology to ancient man. So, around the world, we read tales of the gods giving men fire. This isn't talking about the gods giving men fire in the sense of, oh, now we can cook our meat. We don't have to eat it raw. Everyone around the world already knew how to make fire that way. When the gods gave man fire, they were giving man the ability to make fire hot enough to smelt metals like bronze and iron. And that was, the gods gave man the original technology here on earth. And I think the gods, the fallen angels, have been given man technology ever since. Question, is it possible that with our calendars being off that we are actually in 2023, 2024 with the rapture still being very soon? Well, theoretically that's possible, but it's probably not a question where we can figure out what year we're actually in, because it's hard to know how to harmonize the calendar that we're not following with the calendars that we are following, because we don't know that calendar. But I do believe that God is measuring time at the same time. He's using his own calendar in heaven. He's using the broken 360-day calendar, the original 360-day calendar. He's using our Gregorian calendar. He's using the Essene calendar. He's using the Jewish calendar. And he's using all these at the same time, and he's got all of them working according to his calendar. And he's going to come to a certain point in time. When that point in time comes, he's going to start making stuff happen in the heavens, and boom, he's going to make all these calendars obsolete. He's going to line the universe and the solar system back up and harmonize us for the going into the millennium. So it's hard to say exactly where we are on God's calendar. Just looking at, because I don't trust calendar measurements that much. Not saying we can't use them at all, but my number one go-to thing for where we are in prophetic convergence is not calendar dating stuff. It's simply prophetic convergence in the sense of anti-Semitism, geopolitical alignments, the rise of AI, supercomputing, the things that are going to make life miserable here on earth for the believer. Those kind of things, I think, are shouting imminent rapture. They're shouting a rapture soon. But again, I don't know if we're 2 months away. I wouldn't be surprised if we go up this year, wouldn't be surprised next year, and wouldn't be surprised if it's still a few years away. Any idea how the calendar got off in days but not in hours? Well, the fact of the matter is, we don't know. I haven't really looked much into the day being off in hours. And it might be that our hours are also off. That because by the time we came to modern timekeeping things, that keep hours, we were mostly using the sundial. And the sundial just divides up the day into 12 hours from sunrise to sunset. And it wouldn't matter if those hours were 2 hours longer. Each hour, the day was 2 hours longer for our hours, so that each hour was longer, or if the day was 2 hours shorter, that method for keeping track of the hours of the day would work the same. But it's entirely possible that we're going to have an hour adjustment in the tribulation and the day of the Lord too. Were Adam and Eve flesh and blood before the fall? Absolutely. They absolutely were. Can I spell the last name of Velikovsky? Yes, it's Velikovsky. So one more time, Veli, Veli, Kov, Kov, sky, just like it sounds, sky. He was a Russian scientist. Now, everybody I know that reads Velikovsky and that's learning the subject, they all love Velikovsky, but nobody trusts him on every point. And you read 10, 12 authors on the subject, you begin to see patterns where they all agree, and it's able to start, you're better off able to use the data than if you just read one author. Are we going to rest during the 7-year tribulation? I'm kind of jealous that the early church has had 2,000 years to recuperate. Yeah, well, that 2,000-year head start they have on us, it's not that big of a deal when we move on into eternity. When we go out 1,000,000 years into the future, 2,000 years is a drop in the bucket. During the 7-year tribulation, we absolutely will have rest. Now, that doesn't mean we won't do anything, because we're going to have the wedding. A lot of the wedding ceremony stuff goes on in heaven, including the wedding itself. The wedding supper, the public supper, is at the second coming, according to Revelation 19 and a few other passages. But we have a lot of the wedding stuff is in heaven. We're going to have the judgment seat of the believer is going to be in heaven. We're going to be training for reigning in heaven. And then we're going to be there when the great war in heaven at the middle of the 70th week casts Satan and his angels out. But our time there, our efforts there are going to be rest compared to now. Right now we're in a war, then it will be effort in peacetime. Okay, I have a friend who got into the conspiracy of the Septuagint. It is a better read for Old Testament relevance, which means our traditional Old Testament is false and the Jews have changed it. please explain the Septuagint. Well, there's two classes of readings that I think there's reasonable ground to believe that the Septuagint's preserved the correct readings and the Masoretic hasn't. And those are the genealogies the genealogies in Genesis 5 and 12, I believe it is. I might have those chapters wrong. It's been a while since I studied it. And there's probably about a dozen messianic prophecies where the Jews have changed one letter, which changes the trilateral word, and it changes things. Now, what's interesting is the Old Testament scriptures found in the Dead Sea Scrolls agree with the Septuagint on the changes. They side with the Septuagint and the New Testament quotes against the Masoretic text. And one of them is a body you have prepared for me, which the Masoretic text changes, but the Dead Sea Scrolls and the New Testament and the Septuagint has a body you have prepared for me. So those two classes of passages are a small handful of changes where I think the Septuagint should be trusted over the Masoretic text. But the rest of the place, you need to understand the Septuagint is just a paraphrase. Or a loose translation, oftentimes gives us a paraphrase to understand the right direction for interpretation. Okay. Would you comment on Matthew 24:22, and except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Thanks. Now, well, the pre-wrath school looks at it and says, well, God started with 3.5 years. And then he shortened it up to just 6 months or whatever they're going to shorten it up to. He's made that time shorter. I don't believe that's correct. It shortened to a short 7 years, shortened to a short 3.5 years for the Great Tribulation. He's kept it short in the first place. Okay. So we got the most newest questions done. And maybe I'll do a few more of these older questions. I'll start up at the top at number 68. Well, I don't really have a question with number 68. Do you think that people who claim to be Christians but essay and then there's nothing else? I don't really know what the question is. If you can be accountable at the age of 11, then are there children in hell? How does that correlate? Correlates very easily. If a person comes to the point where he is truly accountable before God, whether that happens at age 7 or happens at 11 or happens at 14, wherever it happens, if a person clearly knows the difference between right and wrong, understands there's a God, a creator, and he starts resisting and rejecting that light and doing his own will, he's a sinner. And we shouldn't have special empathy for a sinful child that's different than any empathy we have for a sinful adult or a sinful grandpa. It's all the same. Can a Democrat be saved? Absolutely. There might be a loss of reward because of lack of discernment on some moral issues. But there are a lot of Democrats who are Democrats more for social issues than for moral issues. North Dakota and South Dakota, Minnesota, there's a number of people that vote Democrat, but they believe in the Second Amendment. They believe in hunting. They're opposed to abortion. They're just concerned about farm laws and labor unions. And I've met a number of Democrats who are of that kind over the years who are born again. Personally, I can't go there, but my heart can embrace them. Second Thessalonians 2 says that we won't be gathered till the great falling away and the man of sin is revealed. Well, no, it does not. the problem here is people are equating the gathering in verse 1 with the coming of the day of the Lord in verses 2 and 3. They're not equated. If you look at the passage itself, verses 1 through 3 is just a Greek petition, a standard petition, just like you've hundreds of times in classical Greek and Koine Greek. A petition, this is a full petition, which has three parts, has the verb of petition, which here is beseech, and then we have the petition itself, which is don't worry about the day of the Lord. And then we have the reason for the petition, or the ground of the petition, which is stated with the huper prepositional phrase. And that phrase is like by the rapture or on account of the rapture. So we beseech you on account of the rapture to not worry about the day of the Lord. It's just a standard petition. And so it's that petition is contrasting the rapture and the day of the Lord. Don't worry about the day of the Lord because you're going up in the rapture. You're not going through the day of the Lord. And the Greek word apostasia, next question says, how does this relate to a pre-trib rapture? Well, some people teach that the Greek word apostasia can be used not merely for moral departure or political departure, but it can be used for physical departure. And it's plausible, it sounds right at first glance. You can weigh that, you can consider it. But if you go back and you look at the actual Greek usage, which I did, I have examined with my own eyeballs, spent 2 years on this project, examined every instance of the Greek word apostasia in the TLG database, which basically has everything from Homer to Byzantine Greek. And from the first reference to apostasia was around 250 BC in Archimedes' Sand Reckoner. And I read all 283 instances up to 500 AD. That's 283 instances over 750 years. I read all those passages in context, found English translations for them where they existed, which is about 60% of them, translated 40% of those passages myself, where either there were no English translations or there was one I could buy a used copy if I could find it for 200 or 300 bucks. So I just translated them. But in all these 283 references from 750 years, apostasia was never once used for physical departure. It was a tiny handful of uses for medical things like an abscess, for some technical senses like distance, a measurement of distance. A few times it was used for divorce, which is a legal sense. But the vast majority of the times, it was used 10% of the time for political rebellion and 90% of the time for religious rebellion. So I don't think apostasia has anything to do with the rapture of the church. And the context says, let no man deceive you, for that day is not here. It has not come. If it has come, it is here. So that day is not here unless the falling away has happened and the man of sin is revealed. Okay, Jesus said we'd know the season of the rapture, yet it appears we're all speculating not knowing. Why the distant future? Well, here's the fact. The passages we're reading now about the nearness of the day of the Lord, they were in the Bible 1,800 years ago. And the Lord has delayed his coming 1,800 years. That's why people are still willing to consider the distant future, because we've been here since the close of the New Testament canon, 1,920 years. Now, we can know the season, but here's an interesting warning about knowing the season. When Israel was first rebirthed as a nation in 1948, a lot of good men were licking their chops and thinking, man, we're really close. Well, here we are, nearly 80 years later, and the rapture hasn't happened. Starting in the 80s, tons of the climb of modern technology. You have geopolitical changes that have come up since then. It's just a vast amount of stuff that's happened. And we're still here. And I don't have any problem speculating about not knowing the day nor the hour. The scriptures are very clear. We cannot know the day nor the hour. And the fact of the matter is, I think it's perfectly legitimate to paraphrase that and say, and we can't know the day of the year either. I've looked at dozens and dozens of theories over the last 8 years, many, many more over the last 40 years, but I'm just talking about the last 8 years. Dozens of theories where people were absolute certain that they come up with the super cool theory that figures the date of the rapture. And that's what was all pure speculation. It is not speculation to stand on the scriptures that no man knows the day nor the hour. It's not speculation to stand on the scriptures that we can recognize the season. We start getting into speculation if, and I do it, we all do it, if we say, I think we're going to be gone within 10 years, probably going to be gone within 5 years. There's a bit of speculation here. I want to encourage you that men have been talking like this for a number of years now, and we're still here. Good men have talked this way. We're still here. So there's nothing in imminence that demands immediate future. There's nothing in the Bible, not a single verse that demands immediate future, like the next few months or this year. There's no passage in the Bible. There's no verse in the Bible. There's no number theory in the Bible that demands this year. I think the Lord's going to allow us all to be embarrassed a few more times, humbled a few more times before we go up in the rapture. As far as the distant future goes, I don't know if we're here for a few more years or a few more years longer than I want to be here or gone this week. I have no idea. I don't even know how to know for sure. There is nothing in the Bible and nothing in our current, the current state of affairs in the world. There's nothing there in prophetic convergence that demands a rapture in the immediate future. In Isaiah 2:4, it says they will beat their swords into plowshares. What about Revelation 28? They will be gathered together for war against the holy city. How can both be true? Well, first of all, I don't trust any theology which pits two verses against each other. How can they both be true? It's obvious how they can both be true, at least to me. There's going to be an Armageddon. All the nations of the earth are going to gather against Israel. And also, in the kingdom, once the Lord Jesus descends from heaven, he's putting a stop to war. And every nation on earth of all the saved people are going to gather up all the weapons that are left, and they're going to turn all those swords into things like plows and wagons and carts or whatever. So I think it's relatively easy to harmonize them. I don't think there's any real problem there. Will we be known as Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians in heaven? Absolutely. Norwegians are Norwegians for all of eternity. Englishmen are Englishmen for all of eternity. Heinz 57s are Heinz 57s for all of eternity. And Jews are Jews for all of eternity, whether they're 100% Jew or 50% Jew, 30% Jew, 70% Jew. They're Jews for all of eternity. Well, here's a praise. I've been listening. Mods, please make sure Pastor Lee knows how much I value his Q&A sessions. They are superior sessions. Well, thank you very much. I don't know if you're listening here today, but I know that folks really appreciate the sessions, and I love to answer the Q&A questions. Well, here's the question that got cut off, and I'm going to have to just kind of speculate what the end of the question is. As a child, I wanted to stop sinning a sin. I asked God to send me to hell if I committed it again, which I did. as I didn't realize. And then I don't know what the rest of the question is, but I'll just answer it anyway. Folks, I appreciate the zeal to stop sinning a sin, but let me encourage you to never pray a prayer like, God, send me to hell if I ever sin this sin again. Don't do that. You're just opening wide the door for the devil to come in and kick your backside. Just lean on the grace of God. Pray to God that he gives you strength not to commit it again. Resist that sin, fight that sin, resist the devil, but don't pray a prayer which is going to come back to haunt you. Thankfully, God doesn't answer our stupid prayers like that. He looks down and says, well, that's just another instance of a human being being kind of on the dumb side, and I'll just overlook that. My grace and mercy is going to cover it. So thankfully, that's the gracious God that we have. Not sure what this question is. Doesn't this build up strive, one having little and the other having much? I'm not really sure what that's talking about, so I'll have to pass on that one. How to approach the fear of standing before a creator? I think I'm going to faint, definitely going to faint. Well, that's a great point, but you need to understand that when we are born again, we move away from being criminals before the bar of God. We cease to be criminals in the court of law. We are adopted into the family of God. We're children of God. We're heirs of God. We're co-heirs with Christ Jesus. We're the bride of Christ. So get all that kind of fear out of your mind. The Bible says, perfect love casts out all fear. Now, most believers start their Christian life with a big amount of fear there. They're afraid of going to hell, and they're afraid of God. But over time, as we walk in the Word, we walk in the Spirit, we grow in the fruits of the Spirit, we grow in the grace of God, we lose that fear. Perfect love casts out fear. And folks, love for the Lord will take you to higher ground than fear ever could in holiness and devotion. So don't fear standing before your Lord. The same Jesus that died on the cross for you, that gave his life for you, is going to be the one you stand before for judgment at the judgment seat of Christ. And that judgment is not going to be executed in the spirit of the law or anything close. It will be executed in the spirit of the same grace that saved you in the first place. Now, everything you've done that's wrong or bad or deficient is going to burn up and be gone. It's not going to come back and haunt you. And the Lord is going to graciously reward you for everything that you've done, even if it's a few minor things like giving a glass of water to somebody in the name of a prophet, or in the name of John MacArthur, or in the name of whoever it is, J.N. Darby, or in the name of Chuck Smith or Chuck Missler, just giving somebody a glass of water in the name of a brother. You're going to have a great reward. So there's no reason in that day, I think in your resurrection body, you're not going to be trembling. You're not going to be afraid. You're going to be resting in the grace of God. Oh, I think this question here, talking about the happy birthday sign when you were gone. Oh yeah, so I did my live stream in my son's dining room when the family was gone, and there was like a birthday sign up on the wall. I don't know much about the birthday sign, and I didn't notice if it was flickering or not. So I don't know what's wrong with the questions. Somehow they all got cut off. A lot of them, half the questions are gone. So maybe that happened when they were transferred over. I don't know. But should I ever take rewards into account when doing good works? Or should my only motivation be my love for Jesus? I want to encourage you to never put contrast between working for reward and working for the glory of the Lord. They are not polar opposites. They are not in contrast. They're not in competition. Now, perhaps some people are going to be overboard in one direction or the other, and that will be problematic, but that's in them, not in the difference itself. The fact of the matter is the Bible commands you to lay up treasure in heaven, and it commands that in half a dozen different places in half a dozen different ways. It commands you to work diligently. So there's no problem with working for reward and working for the glory of God. If you refuse to lay up treasure in heaven and refuse to seek your own treasure in heaven, you are actually dissing a passage of the Bible, which there's no way that's glorifying to God. Does peace and safety have to happen before the rapture? Well, I think there is going to be an element of peace and safety in the world prior to the rapture. And that's going to be associated with that same lulling to sleep that Israel is in, where she has a time of peace in unwalled cities. And she's going to go into a false time of peace that's going to be deceiving to all but the discerning. And I think that things could settle down a little bit in the world, and we're going to start to relax and realize that this technology coming change isn't as bad as we thought it was going to be, even though it's probably going to be worse than the most discerning people have thought. And we'll just get used to it, and it'll be a time of relative peace on earth. And then the rapture will happen, and then things fall apart. Okay, what is provisionalism, or what is provisionism? So Calvinism, man has no free will. Arminianism, man has free will. And they're typically, these have been the two extremes, and men have either been Calvinist or Arminian in church history. But in the last 100 and some years in evangelicalism, we have a lot of people who don't identify as Arminian. They don't believe in falling away, and they don't identify as Calvinists because they believe that every man on the earth gets an opportunity to be saved. So you end up with what we call now provisionalism or provisionism. And this means that God has provided salvation for the whole world. It's sufficient for all, but it's efficient only to those who believe. And it has some agreement with Calvinism and some agreement with Arminianism, but it definitely is eternal security. Regarding the two witnesses, why Moses and why Elijah? Well, I'll give you a short answer, but I would encourage you to watch my video on the identity of the two witnesses, and maybe even watch my video on where I defend that the two witnesses are serving in the second half of the 70th week and not the first half. But why Moses and Elijah? Well, in a nutshell, because the two witnesses are associated with the temple. They have to be Jews. They can't be Gentiles. Gentiles can't go beyond the court of the Gentiles. And these two are associated with the temple. Also, they worked the miracles of Moses and Elijah. Also, it was Moses and Elijah that appeared on the Mount of Transfiguration after the Lord had told the disciples, some of you standing here are not going to perish or die until you see the Lord coming in his glory. I think he was referring to a manifestation of a second coming glory on the Mount of Transfiguration. Moses passed the baton to Joshua. In the tribulation, Moses is going to pass the baton to Jesus. Elijah, in a figure, which was John the Baptist, passed the baton to Jesus. And Elijah at the second coming in literal is going to pass the baton to Jesus. Why should the rapture create confusion like planes falling out of the sky and cars crashing into each other? I imagine God doing something quieter. Well, I kind of imagine something a little more terrifying myself. If you stop and think about it, If human beings vanish, whether we vanish in an instance or we're glorified and we slowly ascend to heaven, this will be a terrifying experience for the world. If you got people that are driving buses or cars on the highway and they're gone, that's havoc. If you've got two pilots in a plane and they're both Christians and they both go, that's havoc. That's a terrible problem. I think there will be disaster at the rapture. The first kind of disaster might not be as extreme as some of us paint it, but there will be problems there. And think about it. When you look at how Hollywood has prepped the world with disaster associated with the UFOs showing up, can you imagine a situation where all of a sudden the saints change in a moment, they slowly glide up, maybe takes a minute or so to get up into glory, and the world sees this happen. And then the government turns on Project Bluebeam, and all these massive spaceships appear around the world. And then all these disasters happen, and the government blames it on the bad bully UFOs or whatever it's going to be. It seems to all fit to me. May not fit exactly the way I think, but I think some combination of disaster with the rapture and the UFO with the rapture is going to come together. Are we convicted of sin after we are born again? Well, it depends. I mean, if you're talking about conviction in the sense of condemnation or judgment, no. If you're talking about conviction in the sense of feeling bad, with the work of your conscience and the work of the Holy Spirit, being brought to repentance, well, absolutely. Okay, so, oh, wow. Okay, I finished all those older questions now too. So, how many here do I have? We got 8 more questions here from older questions. Why don't I go ahead and do this, and then we'll have a clean slate from all the old questions. In Exodus, God said to Moses, Exodus 6:3, "And I appeared unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob by the name of God Almighty, but by my name Jehovah was I not known to them." However, back in Genesis, it appears Abraham knew his name, and Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, as it is said to this day, "In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen." Well, that's very interesting, but I would just point out that it's usually understood that Moses wrote these books. So Moses was writing after the fact, and it would just be a literary device of using Abraham's name as Abraham before his name got changed to Abraham. Also, we're talking about God's name, by my name Jehovah, and Jehovah Jireh. So Abraham knew his name. Well, here's the one thing I would point out on this particular question. Let me look up this verse here. Because early in Genesis, it says when men first began to call upon the name of the Lord. So let me look that up. Whoops. It's hard to type here on my little laptop when it's so high. Whoopsie daisy. Oh my goodness, I can't type here. Unbelievable. Okay, finally got it typed. It took me like 3 days. Okay, Genesis 4:6. Men first called upon the name of the Lord in Genesis 4:26. So that precedes both Exodus 6:3 and Genesis 22:14. So men knew his name, his covenant name, Jehovah, very early on. Please discuss the idea and implications that in eternity we will be male and female, yet not in marriage relationships, and with the curse not in effect. What might that look like and why from God's possible purpose? Well, there's several purposes for man being here. I think I got the wrong window up here. Let me pull this right window up. Yep, here we go. So there are several purposes for the distinction between male and female. We have the whole purpose of creation and recreation, repopulation throughout the history of the world. You have to have male and female to procreate and to have people that can be redeemed. But we also have the distinction between male and female so that we can reflect both sides of the character of God, and so that we can reflect the voluntary subordination relationship between the Father and the Son, and between the Son and man. So there's a typology here. When we get into the resurrection state, we're not going to have any more need for the procreation, and we're not going to have any more need for the typology, so that man's not going to be the head of the woman. I think women will be able to hold the same offices in the kingdom that men hold now. That said, we're not going to cease to be male and female. There is uniquenesses about females that men don't have. There's uniquenesses about men that females don't have. And I find things that are enjoyable about female friends that are different than that are the enjoyments with male friends. And that's entirely apart from the marriage relationship. We are going to enjoy same-sex friendships and opposite-sex friendships for all of eternity. They all have their unique blessings and benefits. Okay, what is the best way to address family who have fallen into covenant theology and believe that the promise to Abraham was past tense and doesn't continue to Israel today? They seem to ignore a pre-trib view and hold a partial preterist view. They're definitely a replacement view. Well, there's not much you can do here except pray and gently encourage them in the literal, historical, grammatical hermeneutic to just simply trust the scriptures. They have a hard time seeing past their magic wand theology. So they have a few verses in the New Testament that are like magic wands. Those magic wands give them permission to go back to the Old Testament and wave that magic wand and turn all these instances of Israel into the church, turn all the promises to Israel into promises to the church, and then just kind of sweep all the curses to Israel under the rug. I think it's a very dangerous, unprofitable theology. But the best way is gentle, loving insistence on the truth, patience, and faith. Genesis 15:13 says, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. Then in verse 16 it says, then in the fourth generation they will return here. Can we conclude then that a generation equals 100 years? Well, that's not where I would go, though you might go there. But if you go to websites like Answers in Genesis and type in Genesis 15:13 or type in questions about the 400 years, you are going to find some very excellent material that's going to help you walk through that. So apologetic sites like Answers in Genesis are going to give you a very accurate, definitive handling of that. And if I tried to give you an answer off the top of my head, I'd probably fumble the ball. Okay, here's a great question on the calendar. I know our calendar is off, but biblically, doesn't the millennium have to start by the year 2100 or by year 3000 to be generous? Otherwise, we'd be cutting into the 6,000th year, and the millennium would start after the year 6000, assuming the 6-day theory is correct. Well, here's the difficulty that we're facing. We don't know exactly what year we're in. If we're counting the 6,000 years from creation till now, men are all over the map. Some of them have 3,800 years from creation to Christ. Some of them have 4,000 years. Some of them have 4,200 years. They're all over the map. They average around 4,000 years. And so we have like 2,000 years from somewhere around the cross to the kingdom. Now, I have become convinced that we shouldn't be measuring from the cross, but from the transfer of the Jewish remnant to the mixed church, to the one new man, Ephesians 2, where we have Jews and Gentiles mixed in one body. That could be, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years after the cross. So we've got a bit more time before we're actually going to be going beyond where we think the 6,000 years should be. But I would encourage us all with this thought that hold the math stuff loosely, because we know we got problems. We know there's information that we don't have. We don't have full information. We know that our understanding of chronology has problems. We don't even know for sure, absolute certain, what year the cross is. And we don't know where we're supposed to measure the 2,000 years from. Therefore, it's hard to know where the 2,000 years go. Personally, I think the 2,000 years will be fulfilled to the year, to the month, to the week, to the day, to the hour, to the minute, even to the second. But we're kind of educationally making an educated guess on where the 2,000 years starts and where it's going to end. Okay. Did Jesus actually have to follow suit laid out in Leviticus to go to the Father and apply his blood to the mercy seat to cover the ark? Yes, I believe the high priest did do that, in that the Lord Jesus actually himself put blood on the altar in heaven and now ministers as the high priest. And that's a wonderful thought when you think about it. Folks, we have a man in heaven. We have a man in glory. Not only do we have a God in heaven who loves us, we have a God manifest in human flesh in heaven who loves us. So Jesus is 100% God, so that blood has infinite value. He's 100% man, so that blood of infinite value can be applied to man and cover all of man. What a wonderful thought this is. Not only that, because he's fully human, he's been tried in every way that we've been tried. He's felt the same range of human emotions and feelings as we have. He knows we're weak. And he doesn't just know we're weak, because he created us. He's been in our shoes. He's walked a mile in our moccasins. And he knows what it's like to be a human being. And he has empathy with us. If you can enter into this glorious truth of the sonship of the believer, and enter into this glorious truth of the humanity of Jesus Christ, it will help you immensely to enter into ground of victory, both in victory against sin and victory in when you feel condemned or unworthy or unqualified. And you'll just realize deeply the grace of God. I'm not sure what this question is saying, but I'll take a stab at it. Would you explain the regeneration, baptism, and its connection to salvation by acts instead of faith? So I don't know if they're saying regeneration, comma, baptism, or if they're saying regeneration, baptism, like in baptismal salvation. I'm not sure. And then its connection to salvation by acts or deeds instead of faith. Well, first of all, let me say I do not believe that baptism has any direct connection to salvation. It's only indirectly related to salvation in that it's one of those acts of obedience that should follow our faith, but it's not a cause of salvation. It's not a condition of salvation. And regeneration and baptism do not go together, not in any close relationship anyway. Regeneration is the new birth when you're born again. We're not born again when we get water poured on us. We're not born again when we get water sprinkled on us. We're not born again when we get immersed in water. Immersion is a picture of burial. It's Romans 6, we're baptized into the death of Christ. So baptism is a funeral. Salvation is when you die to the world through the indwelling Holy Spirit, which is the Spirit of Christ in you. His death is imputed to you, and his life is given to you, so that his death is your death. You're regarded as having died already. So then the next thing after your death at salvation is you go to your funeral. That's baptism. And then in the funeral, you rise from the dead because you come back out of the water. And that's a picture of the resurrection. So baptism is a picture both of your death and your resurrection. Now, what's the connection between salvation with works and salvation with faith? Now, they've got works instead of faith here, and I don't think that's good. That language, to me, we should never be using that language. It's putting tension between faith and works. For the believer, there should be no tension there, unless we're talking about works needed for salvation. But when it comes to the works that stem from our salvation, we're created unto good works in Christ Jesus. This is just a fact. And we're supposed to follow Jesus in obedience. And it tells us in James, faith without works is dead. So the faith without works is dead in the same way that a body without breath is dead. So there's no such thing as faith that does not bring forth any works at all. Such a faith has never existed. There'll be nobody in heaven with that faith. Even the shortest windows of faith on earth have evidence. You got the thief on the cross. He brought forth evidence, even though he's in very few minutes left in his life. And he was in a very painful, very difficult situation. Faith always manifests itself. The new birth always manifests itself. Now, you can slow it down. You can frustrate the grace of God. You can slow the grace of God down. You can slow your sanctification down. You can hinder your sanctification, but you cannot stop the process. It's impossible. How in the world are you going to stop the Holy Spirit? How in the world are you the believer going to stop the Word of God? It's not even possible. So wherever you have real faith, you are going to have real works. And don't put a wall between them. Now, it's legitimate to understand that people can slow the process down. They can hinder it. They just can't stop it. In the parable of the wedding feast, there is a man who got in without a wedding garment and was thrown out. What does he represent? If he was unsaved, it doesn't look like he would have been there to start with. Well, here's the problem. If you think the wedding supper happens in heaven immediately after the rapture, now you got a big problem. There's no unsaved people up there to get booted out of the wedding. But if the public wedding supper happens at the second coming, then there's plenty of people here on earth at the sheep and goats judgment. There's plenty of goats to say, Lord, Lord, I belong here. And the Lord gets to say, no, where's your wedding garment? You're not born again. So I think that the person without a wedding garment is unsaved. I believe that those out of the 10 virgins, there were 5 foolish virgins who didn't have oil in their vessel. I think they didn't have the Holy Spirit. They're not saved. They're religious, but not saved. Same thing with one taken, the other left. It's a 50-50 division, just like we see in other passages of Scripture. These people are religious and not born again. Since God gave man 120 years before the flood, and Jesus said it would be as the days of Noah, does that mean we have 120 years from the time Israel came back? That could be. That's as reasonable as many of other number theories I've heard. I'm not convinced, but I think it's a consideration that should be taken into consideration. We still have 30 some years here now, if that's the case, before the kingdom starts, and maybe 30 years or 28 years or 25 years till the rapture. I'm a little skeptical about that. But we'll see. And maybe the 120 years will be measured from some other event in Israel's history and not her national birth. Why do some claim that the Gentiles have become Israel? Is it called replacement theology? Where do they get that idea? Well, they get it largely, for instance, from Ephesians 2, a misunderstanding where we used to be strangers and now we're no longer strangers. They don't really enter into the terminology there, which says there's one new man. They treat it like it's talking about the same old man. And then they just go from there and they look at passages, talk about the true circumcision, and it just gets a mess from there. Okay, I just want to clarify the Septuagint versus the Masoretic text. Does it even matter what we read? She says that our Old Testament has been changed for end times issues. Well, I'm aware that there's some serious Hebrew scholars who are convinced that the Masoretic peoples made a few changes in messianic passages. I'm not aware that there's any significant changes for Bible prophecy. If somebody is aware of that, I would appreciate you shooting me an email or sending that information to one of my moderators, and they will get it to me because that's something I would love to look into. But again, I would say, in general, we trust the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls are very, very close. We have the chronology issues from Genesis that are different, and we have a small handful of messianic passages that are different. My friend has said our Old Testament has been changed from the Septuagint enough to believe that we can't trust things in our Old Testament on end times matters because of the Jews who changed the words in the Hebrew. Well, again, this general fear has been debunked because the Dead Sea Scrolls have, as a general rule, the same Hebrew text as the later Masoretic text. You can compare the book of Isaiah. It's virtually identical. Here and there, you have those chronology passages in Genesis where you got a matter of numbers that are different, ages. It's a well-known problem that doesn't bring the general integrity of the Masoretic text into question at all. And then you have the question of the translation of a handful of messianic passages. And this is, again, is a relatively well-known issue, but the experts on both sides of the issue, at least those that are not given over to some weird Bible theory, they're all agreed in the general integrity of the Masoretic text. I'm certainly convinced of the general integrity of the Masoretic text. Do I think any technology will survive to the millennial kingdom? Well, I think it's all going to be crushed. I think we're going to go a slow start going into the kingdom, but I think man will eventually rise up and bring technology back. And as far as us, with our that are the glorified saints, we'll have all kinds of technology. Okay, my son thinks that very few people will come to saving faith during the tribulation. Aren't the multitude of martyred saints from the tribulation? Well, I don't know if there'll be more martyrs during the tribulation than there were during the church age, but I would say this. Revelation 7 is very clear. There's a multitude so big that no man can number it saved during the tribulation. Now, the tribulation is going to involve the greatest apostasy in the history of the world. But at the same token, it's also going to involve the greatest revival in the history of the world. 1/3 of the Jews will be saved. I think a massive amount of Gentiles will be saved. Is there going to be free will in heaven? Well, absolutely. You'll be free to pick whatever flavor of ice cream you want. You will be free to do whatever you please that's not sin. We will be rewired in such a way that our desire right now to not sin is going to be ratified and solidified and set in concrete. But you'll definitely have a free will. What do I mean by express eternal rewards? Well, I'm not sure exactly what the question is asking, but there's going to be two classes of your rewards in eternity. You're going to have your passive reward, which every believer gets. You get that simply because you're a child of God, you're born again. That's an infinite inheritance as an heir of God and a co-heir of Christ Jesus. And that is also that you're part of the bride of Christ. That's a massive, massive reward. And every believer gets that. Even if they were just saved for 5 seconds and died, they get that. Then there's also rewards for our service. And it's not merely how much we did, the rewards for service at the judgment seat of Christ, or how much, also include how much opportunity we had. Those with less opportunity are going to be judged according to their smaller opportunity. Those with greater opportunity are going to be judged according to their greater opportunity. And those with less light will be judged according to their less light. Those with more light will be judged according to their more light. God is going to be more than fair at the judgment seat of Christ. I have a 2-year-old son. Will he receive a crown of glory, a crown of righteousness? Now, I don't know what kind of crowns children under the age of accountability are going to receive or what kind of rewards. I wouldn't pretend to know. I would say this on the crowns. I know some people treat it like there's crown of glory is different, and then there's a crown of righteousness over here, and they got 5, 6, 7 different crowns. Perhaps that's correct. I don't look at these crowns that are mentioned as literal crowns. I look at these like the crown of glory is the fact that you're going to have glorification. The crown of righteousness is the fact that you're going to be made perfectly righteous for all of eternity. So that every believer gets the crown of glory. Every believer gets the crown of righteousness. That's how I look at it. Thought exercise. If you were given a prophecy, how would you prove to people it was real? asking for a friend. Well, if it comes true, if it literally comes true, and the person is truly godly, then there's reason to believe that was from the Lord. If the person is not truly godly, or they're off on a wild rabbit trail of tangents and goofy doctrines, they're all unstable and all messed up, then even if it comes true, I'd still ignore it. Will our rewards affect just heaven or all of eternity? Well, definitely all of eternity. So you're going to receive a reward that's specifically in the New Jerusalem, the city that we call heaven. You'll have your mansion there. You'll have whatever you have there. But we're also going to receive an inheritance in this entire vast universe. Folks, I am perfectly intend to ask for 10 galaxy clusters, not 10 galaxies and not 10 planets, not 10 suns or solar systems, 10 galaxy clusters, just mine. And that's just like asking God for a handful of change to go buy a cup of coffee. It's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. How are believers saved yet so as by fire? Well, they're saved. They're definitely saved, absolutely saved. But when they stand before the judgment seat of Christ, a lot of stuff is going to burn up. And you also have, from another angle, because that's judging on the works after you're a believer, but you have ungodly people who've been saved in terrible circumstances and died shortly thereafter. Deathbed type salvation. They were snatched by the fire, right out of the fire. They're saved, so as by fire. All right. We finished the questions tonight. All the old ones, all the new ones. My throat's still hanging in there. We still got 487 people watching. That's pretty amazing. But I'm going to log out, folks. It's been 3 hours and 5 minutes. I think we're coming close to setting a record here. Been an amazing evening. Thank you very much. I want to thank all my moderators for hanging in there. I want to thank you for the questions. You guys ask amazing questions. It's really encouraging to me that people are thinking. And I'm surprised I didn't get more flat earth questions. Maybe my moderators weed those out. I don't know. I do see the comments once in a while in the chat. But anyway, that flat earth's for another day. Folks, take care. God bless and have a wonderful evening. I got to go to bed because I'm going to be getting up fairly early. Talk to you later.